Yo, what's up everyone? It's Gringotts Hub, and today we're checking out, what if a Gringotts ritual revealed Harry was the heir to 7 ancient houses and the king of magical Britain. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, Blood and Gold. The letter arrived at 4 in the morning, carried by an owl that looked like it had been through a war. Harry caught it at the window before it could crash into Hedwig's cage, and the bird gave him a look of such exhausted gratitude that he fed it 3 treats before even looking at the parchment. The handwriting was shaky, cramped, and he had to hold it up to the moonlight to read it. Harry, I know you have no reason to trust me on this, but I need you to meet me at the Leaky Cauldron tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. Don't tell anyone. I mean anyone. Not Ron, not Hermione, not Dumbledore. Especially not Dumbledore. I overheard Gran talking to someone through the flue. She didn't know I was listening. They mentioned your name and something about Gringotts and an inheritance that was supposed to be claimed on your 13th birthday. You're 15, Harry. Whatever it is, someone made sure you didn't know about it. I know what it's like to have people decide things for you. So I'm telling you. Please come. Neville. Harry read it 3 times. Then he sat on the edge of his bed in the smallest bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until he saw stars. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the graveyard. 3 weeks since he'd watched Cedric die. 3 weeks of nightmares and silence and the Dursleys tiptoeing around him like he might explode, which, to be fair, he might. 2 days ago he'd gotten so angry at the sound of Dudley's television bleeding through the floor that every glass in the kitchen had shattered simultaneously. Vernon hadn't said a word. Just swept it up with a dustpan, hands trembling, and retreated to the living room. Harry looked at the letter again. Someone made sure you didn't know about it. Something cold and sharp crystallized in his chest. Not surprise. He was well past surprise when it came to the adults in his life keeping secrets. No, this was something quieter. Something that had been building since the moment Dumbledore had looked at him across his desk after the tournament and said, with those kind, tired eyes, "You've been so brave, Harry." Brave. Right. Brave and ignorant and exactly where everyone wanted him. He pulled his trunk out from under the bed and started packing. The Leaky Cauldron at 8 in the morning was nearly empty. Tom the barkeep was wiping down the bar with a rag that had probably been old when Grindelwald was young, and 2 witches sat in the corner nursing cups of tea and gossip. Harry slipped in with his hood up, trunk shrunken in his pocket, a trick he'd learned from watching Mad Eye, or whoever Mad Eye had actually been, and spotted Neville immediately. Neville was sitting at a back table, and he looked terrible. Not sick terrible. Determined terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes and his jaw was set in a way Harry had only seen once before, in the common room, first year, when Neville had tried to stop the 3 of them from sneaking out. You came, Neville said, and the relief in his voice was so raw that Harry felt a twist of guilt for almost not coming. You said don't tell anyone. Harry sat down across from him. That's either very smart or very stupid. Bit of both, probably. Neville pushed a glass of pumpkin juice across the table. Drink. You look like death. Cheers. I didn't mean, I know. Harry took a sip. Tell me what you heard. Neville leaned forward, elbows on the table, and dropped his voice. Gran had a flu call 2 nights ago. Late, maybe 1 in the morning. I was coming downstairs for water and I heard her voice. She was talking to someone, I didn't recognize the voice, but they sounded old. Proper old. And worried. About? About you. The other person said, and I'm quoting as close as I can remember, the Potter boy should have been brought in on his 13th birthday. The accounts are sealed. The goblins are getting restless. If he doesn't claim his inheritance soon, the ministry will find a way to seize it. And then Gran said, Neville paused, and something flickered across his face. Anger, Harry realized. Actual anger on Neville Longbottom's face. Gran said, Dumbledore assured us it would be handled. He said the boy wasn't ready. And the other person laughed. Not a nice laugh. They said, ready? Augusta, if that boy knew what he was heir to, no one would be ready. Silence between them. Tom's rag squeaked against the bar. That's when Gran noticed me on the stairs, Neville said. She ended the call and told me to go to bed. Wouldn't answer a single question. Told me I'd misheard, that it was nothing. But I know what I heard, Harry. Harry's grip on the pumpkin juice glass was white-knuckled. He made himself let go. An inheritance. At Gringotts. That someone's been keeping from you for 2 years. 3, technically. I turned 13 before 3rd year. Neville's eyes widened slightly. 3 years. Who has the authority to? He stopped. They both knew the answer. Harry stood up. Right. We're going to Gringotts. Now. Can you think of a reason to wait? Neville stared at him for a beat, then a slow, crooked grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that Harry suspected Neville's father might have worn, once upon a time. No. No, I really can't. Diagon Alley was still waking up. Shop owners were unlocking doors and setting out displays, and the cobblestones were wet from an overnight rain that made everything smell like stone and magic. Harry walked fast, hood still up, and Neville kept pace beside him with a focus that bordered on military. You should know something, Neville said as Gringotts came into view, its white marble facade glowing in the early light. Pure-blood families, old ones, I mean, we take Gringotts seriously. This isn't like going to a bank. The goblins have their own laws, their own justice. Once you're inside and you invoke your right to an inheritance test, nobody can interfere. Not the Ministry, not Dumbledore, nobody. Goblin territory is sovereign. Harry looked at him sideways. You know a lot about this. Gran's been drilling this stuff into my head since I could walk. You are the Longbottom heir, Neville. You will comport yourself accordingly. He did a passable imitation of Augusta Longbottom's stern tones. I never thought I'd actually use any of it. They climbed the marble steps. The goblin guards at the entrance gave Harry a long, appraising look, longer than usual, he thought, but maybe he was being paranoid, and let them through. Inside, the main hall of Gringotts was vast and gleaming and largely empty at this hour. A few goblins sat at their stations, scratching away in ledgers the size of small tables. Harry walked straight to the nearest open teller. The goblin was ancient even by goblin standards, with fingers like gnarled tree roots and eyes like chips of black glass. I'd like to request an inheritance test, Harry said. His voice didn't waver. He was faintly proud of that. The goblin looked up. Name? Harry James Potter. Something happened. It was subtle, a fractional widening of those black eyes, a stillness that spread through the goblin's body like frost across a window. Then the goblin set down his quill with exaggerated care and said, "Wait here." He disappeared through a door behind the counter. Harry heard rapid footsteps, the sound of goblin voices speaking in gobbledygook, urgent, clipped. Neville shifted beside him. Is this normal? Harry murmured. No, Neville said. This is not normal. The goblin returned flanked by 2 others. One was tall for a goblin, wearing armor that looked ceremonial but carried the scratches and dents of actual use. The other was smaller, older, draped in a dark robe embroidered with silver thread that caught the torchlight. Mr. Potter, said the robed goblin, and his voice was silk over gravel. I am Ragnarok, director of Gringotts London. You honor us with your presence. His eyes slid to Neville. And Heir Longbottom. An interesting pairing. Director, Harry said. I want an inheritance test. A full one. You are aware that such a test requires a blood offering and carries binding legal weight in both goblin and wizarding law. I am. And that the results, once revealed, cannot be concealed, contested, or reversed. Good. A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed Ragnar's face. Or hunger. With goblins, Harry found, it was hard to tell the difference. Follow me. They were led through corridors Harry had never seen, deeper into the bank, past the cart tracks and the vaults, into areas where the walls shifted from marble to raw stone carved with symbols that pulsed faintly with their own light. The air changed. It felt thicker, older, charged with a magic that predated wands. These are the ritual chambers, Neville whispered. Gran told me about them. They haven't been used in decades. Ragnar pushed open a heavy stone door and gestured them inside. The chamber was circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling covered in constellations that moved. In the center sat a stone basin on a pedestal, and beside it, a silver knife that gleamed without any light source. The floor was inscribed with concentric rings of runes that Harry couldn't read but could feel. They hummed against his skin like standing too close to a transformer. The inheritance right of blood and legacy, Ragnar said, positioning himself behind the basin. 2 other goblins had appeared, taking positions at the edges of the room. The armored one stood by the door. 7 drops of blood into the basin. The magic does the rest. Mr. Potter, your hand. Harry stepped forward, picked up the silver knife, and drew it across his palm without hesitation. The pain was clean, almost musical, and the blood that welled up was darker than he expected. He held his hand over the basin and let 7 drops fall. They hit the stone with sounds like small bells. The runes on the floor ignited. Not with fire, with light, pure and white and so bright that Harry squinted. The blood in the basin began to move, swirling, spreading, and a sheet of parchment materialized in the air above it, hanging there like a projected screen. Text was writing itself in lines of gold and crimson, and Ragnar leaned forward to read it, and Harry watched the goblin's face change. The director of Gringotts went white. Not pale, white, as if every drop of blood had drained from his body. What? Harry said. What does it say? Ragnar didn't answer. His mouth was opening and closing. One of the other goblins made a choked sound. The armored guard by the door took a sharp step forward, read the floating parchment, and then did something Harry had never seen a goblin do in his life. He dropped to one knee. What the hell, Harry started. Read it, Neville said, his voice strange and distant. He was staring at the parchment with an expression Harry couldn't parse. Harry. Read it. Harry turned and read. Inheritance right, full blood and legacy accounting subject, Harry James Potter date of birth, July 31st, 1980 blood status, half-blood, first-generation reclamation, confirmed heir by blood, House of Potter, ancient and most noble, heir by patrilineal descent House of Peveril, ancient and hallowed, heir by patrilineal descent, Ignotus line, House of Gryffindor, founding and eternal, heir by matrilineal descent, Evans nay Gryffindor squib line reclaimed, House of Pendragon, sovereign and paramount, heir by blood of the first king, unbroken line, dormant since 1402, confirmed heir by magical conquest, House of Slytherin, founding and eternal, claimed by triple right, survival of killing curse, 1981, defeat of shade, 1992, blood victory in ritual combat, 1995, confirmed heir by legal bequest, House of Black, ancient and most noble, named heir by will of Sirius Orion Black III, Lord Black, filed Gringotts, 1993, sealed by order of Albus Dumbledore, confirmed heir by prophetic designation, House of Le Fay, arcane and primordial, heir by prophecy of Morgana, when the seventh son of magic stands against the dark, Le Fay's power shall answer. Combined titles, Lord of 7 ancient houses Commander of the Goblin Alliance, by Pendragon Compact, 892 AD, High King of Magical Britain, dormant title, may be claimed by declaration, total combined vault holdings, calculating, in excess of 47 billion galleons across 23 active vaults. Sealed items of note, the Cloak of Ignotus Peveril, currently in subjects' possession, the sword of Godric Gryffindor, recalled to vault, currently held illegally by Albus Dumbledore, the crown of Pendragon, sealed in High Vault 1, accessible only by Heir, the staff of Morgana Le Fay, sealed in Deep Vault, accessible only by Heir, 7 Wizengamot seats, currently voted by proxy, Albus Dumbledore, unauthorized. Note from Gringotts Records Department, inheritance notification was sent to Magical Guardian, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, on subjects' 11th, 12th, and 13th birthdays. All notifications were acknowledged and suppressed. Gringotts filed formal protest with the Wizengamot in 1993. Protest was dismissed by Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore. The chamber was absolutely silent. Harry read it again. Then a third time. Each time, the words were the same. Each time, something new sank in, another layer, another betrayal, another piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. Neville had sat down on the stone floor. Not intentionally, it seemed, his legs had simply given out. He was staring at Harry with an expression that had moved past shock into something almost reverential. Merlin's beard, he breathed. Director Ragnarok, Harry said, and his voice sounded strange in his own ears, very calm, very steady, like the surface of deep water. This says that Dumbledore received 3 notifications about my inheritance and suppressed all of them. That is correct, Mr. Potter. It says he's been voting my Wizengamot seats. 7 of them. Without my knowledge or authorization. Also correct. It says Sirius Black filed a will naming me his heir in 1993, and Dumbledore sealed it. Ragnarok's jaw tightened. Even the goblins, Harry realized, were angry about this. Correct. We protested. The protest was dismissed by the very person who sealed it. Yes. I noticed the circularity. Harry's hand was still bleeding sluggishly. He hadn't felt it until now. He watched the blood drip onto the stone floor, and the runes drank it in, glowing faintly brighter. Tell me about the Pendragon title. Tell me about the king business. Ragnarok exchanged a look with the armored goblin, who was still on one knee. The Pendragon line has been dormant, not extinct, dormant, since 1402, when the last acknowledged king of magical Britain died without claiming a successor. The Wizengamot was established as a temporary governing body until the line manifested again. Temporary, Mr. Potter. 600 years of temporary. The goblins have long memories. The Pendragon Compact that governs our alliance with magical Britain was sworn to the crown, not to the ministry. So the ministry has been operating on borrowed authority for 6 centuries, yes. Harry laughed. It came out rough and slightly unhinged, and Neville flinched, but Harry couldn't help it. It was that or scream. Right. Okay. And my mother was a descendant of Gryffindor. Through a squib line that left the magical world several generations ago. The Evans family. When your mother manifested magic, the Gryffindor blood reasserted itself. This is not uncommon with founding lines, they go dormant, run through Muggle families for generations, then resurface. The magic always comes home. Did she know? Unknown. But her magical guardian from the age of 11 was Albus Dumbledore. The calm surface of Harry's voice cracked, just slightly. Of course it was. He closed his eyes. Behind them, he saw Cedric's face, surprised, empty, falling. He saw Dumbledore's office, the spinning silver instruments, the way the old man had looked at him with such gentle, suffocating kindness. He saw the cupboard under the stairs. 10 years in a cupboard, when he'd owned estates. 10 years of Dudley's hand-me-downs, when he'd been sitting on a fortune that made the Malfoys look like they were on benefits. 10 years of being told he was nothing, nobody, unwanted, while the headmaster of Hogwarts sat on his titles and voted his seats and filed away his inheritance like it was something to be dealt with later. When Harry opened his eyes, every torch in the chamber had gone out. The only light came from the runes on the floor, which were blazing, and from Harry himself, a faint, golden luminescence that clung to his skin like mist. Neville scrambled to his feet. "Harry, I'm fine." The glow faded. The torches reignited. Harry looked at his cut palm and watched it heal itself, the skin knitting together without scar or seam. "I want to claim it. All of it. Every house, every title, every vault. Right now." Ragnar's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "As is your right, my lord. The claiming requires you to put on the head of house rings. They will test you, the magic will judge whether you are worthy. Given what I've just witnessed, I don't anticipate a problem." He produced a long wooden case from somewhere, Harry hadn't seen him move to get it, and opened it on the pedestal beside the basin. Inside, on black velvet, sat 7 rings. Harry knew, looking at them, that they were more than jewelry. Each one hummed with its own frequency, its own character. The Potter ring was warm, welcoming, familiar. It felt like the photographs he'd seen of his parents, like something he should have had all along. The Peveril ring was ancient and strange, angular silver set with a black stone that seemed to contain its own darkness. The Gryffindor ring was gold and ruby, and it roared, there was no other word for it, a silent vibration that resonated in his chest like a lion's call. The Slytherin ring was cold, resistant, silver and emerald, and it fought him. Harry felt it push back against his magic, testing, probing, looking for weakness. He pushed through it like walking through a wall of ice, and it shattered into acceptance on his finger with a sound like breaking chains. The black ring slid on easily, loyal, pack-oriented, recognizing the godson its master had chosen. The Pendragon ring was heavy. Not physically, magically. It carried the weight of centuries, of every king who'd worn it, and when Harry put it on, the runes on the floor exploded with light so bright that Neville threw his arm over his eyes and even Ragnar staggered back. For a moment, just a moment, Harry felt them all. Every ancestor, every bloodline, every magical legacy flowing into him like rivers into an ocean. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, terrifying, and then the Lu Fei ring reached for him. He hadn't touched it yet. It came to him, flying off the velvet, and slammed onto his right ring finger with an impact that sent a shockwave through the chamber. The constellations on the ceiling went wild, spinning, reforming into patterns that hadn't been seen in living memory. Harry's scar, which had been a constant, dull ache since the graveyard, went suddenly, completely silent for the first time in 4 years. The silence was so shocking that Harry gasped. "The rings have accepted you." Ragnar's voice was hoarse. He was on his knees now, beside the armored guard. Every goblin in the chamber was kneeling. All 7. In the recorded history of magical Britain, no single individual has ever been accepted by 7 houses simultaneously. What you've just done, what you are, is without precedent. Harry looked at his hands. The 7 rings glimmered on his fingers, and as he watched, they melted into his skin, vanishing, becoming part of him. He could feel them there, humming just beneath the surface, ready to manifest whenever he willed it. "The Pendragon Compact," Harry said slowly. "It makes me commander of the Goblin Alliance." "It does. What does that actually mean?" "It means that the Goblin nation of Britain recognizes you as its sovereign ally. Our warriors are your warriors. Our vaults are your vaults. Our enemies are your enemies." Ragnar stood, and there was something different in his bearing now, something fierce and proud and almost joyful. "We have been waiting, Your Grace. For 600 years, we have been subjugated by a ministry that had no legitimate authority over us. The compact was with the crown. The crown is returned." Harry let that sink in. Then he turned to Neville, who looked like he'd been hit by a bludger. "You all right?" "Am I?" Neville made a sound that was half laugh, half wheeze. "Harry, you're the bloody king of magical Britain and you're asking if I'm all right? You're my friend. You brought me here. Seems like the right question." Neville's expression shifted. The shock bled away, replaced by something deeper, loyalty, conviction, a fire that had been banked under years of self-doubt and his grandmother's shadow. He straightened his spine in a way Harry had never seen from him, squared his shoulders, and said, "The House of Longbottom served the Pendragon crown for 12 generations. My ancestors swore an oath." He met Harry's eyes. "I swore no oath. But I'd like to." "Neville, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. There's a difference." He held out his hand. "Let me help you. Not because of destiny or bloodlines or any of that rubbish. Because you're the best person I know and you've been getting screwed over since you were a baby and I'm angry about it." Harry gripped his hand. "Then stay beside me. Try and stop me." Ragnarok cleared his throat diplomatically. "Your Grace, there is the matter of your properties. Potter Manor has been sealed since 1981, maintained by house elves under Gringotts authority. The other estates are similarly preserved. You have immediate access to all of them. I would also note that as the claimed lord of these houses, you are emancipated under magical law. No guardian. No restrictions. You may use magic freely, reside where you choose, and conduct all business as a legal adult." Something in Harry's chest unlocked. A cage he hadn't known he was in. The bars were Privet Drive and Dumbledore's careful management and the Ministry's tracking spells and the entire apparatus of a world that had treated him like a chess piece since the day he was born. He was done with cages. "One more question," Harry said. "The parchment mentioned 7 Wizengamot seats. Dumbledore's been voting them by proxy. Can I revoke that?" "Already done." Ragnarok's grin was savage. "The moment you claimed the rings, all unauthorized proxy access was automatically terminated. Dumbledore will have received a notification from our legal department approximately," he checked a small pocket watch, 4 minutes ago. Harry matched the goblin's grin. "Then I'd say we have about 10 minutes before he shows up. Director, I'd like to see the Pendragon Vault. But first," he looked at Neville. "What do you know about Potter Manor? It's supposed to be one of the great estates. Unplottable, massive wards, somewhere in the Welsh countryside. No one's seen it in 14 years. Feel like going home with me?" Neville grinned that crooked grin again. "Absolutely. They didn't make it to the vault before Dumbledore arrived." Harry heard him before he saw him, the distinctive sound of someone arguing with goblins who were not in the mood to be argued with. The voice echoed down the stone corridor, and Harry stopped walking, turned, and waited. Dumbledore came around the corner at speed, which was something. Harry had never seen the old man move fast. His robes were slightly askew, his half-moon spectacles sat crooked on his nose, and his face wore an expression Harry had never seen on it before, genuine, uncontrolled panic. Behind him, 4 goblin guards were following with expressions of professional hostility, hands on weapons. "Harry." Dumbledore's voice was warm, concerned, grandfatherly, all the usual notes played with practiced precision. "My boy, I received a most alarming notification from Gringotts and came as quickly as I could. Whatever has happened, I'm sure we can stop." Harry said it quietly, but the word carried weight, literal, magical weight that pressed against the walls of the corridor and made the torches gutter. Dumbledore stopped. Not voluntarily, Harry realized. The old man's feet had simply refused to carry him any further. The corridor itself had responded to Harry's authority. "Ah," Dumbledore said softly. His eyes, no twinkle now, just sharp, calculating blue, moved from Harry to the 7 faintly visible impressions on his fingers where the rings sat beneath the skin. "I see. Do you?" Harry stepped forward. "Because from where I'm standing, you don't see much at all. Or you see everything and you just don't care. Which is it?" "Harry, there is an explanation, 3 notifications. That's what the records show. 3 separate notifications about my inheritance, acknowledged and suppressed by you. A sealed will from my godfather. 7 Wizengamot seats voted without my knowledge. My mother's bloodline, did you know? About the Gryffindor connection? About the Pendragon connection? Dumbledore's silence was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard. You knew. Harry felt the magic building inside him, not with anger, with clarity. Every ring pulsed in harmony, and the corridor responded, the ancient stone of Gringotts resonating with power it recognized. You knew since before I was born. That's why you were so interested in my parents. That's why the prophecy mattered to you, not because of Voldemort, but because the child in the prophecy was also the heir to the Pendragon line. You needed to control me. You needed me ignorant and grateful and dependent on you, so that when the time came, you would be alive. Dumbledore's voice cracked like a whip, and for a moment, the mask dropped entirely. This was not the kindly headmaster. This was the man who had defeated Grindelwald, sharp-edged, formidable, and utterly convinced of his own rightness. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Harry. The prophecy, the Horcruxes, he stopped himself. Too late. Horcruxes, Harry repeated. The word tasted like ash. That's a new one. Care to finish that sentence, or should I add it to the list of things you were planning to tell me on your own schedule? Dumbledore closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had shifted, a recalculation, a chess player realizing the board had changed irrevocably. Harry. I have made mistakes. I freely acknowledge that. But everything I did to protect you. You left me with the Dursleys. The Blood Wards. I'm the heir to 7 houses with combined ward systems that make the Hogwarts wards look like a garden fence. The Blood Wards were one option, Professor. The least comfortable, least kind, least humane option, and you chose it because it kept me where you wanted me, small, scared, and in the dark. Harry took another step forward. Dumbledore, to his credit, didn't step back, but the 4 goblin guards shifted, and their hands tightened on their weapons. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. If you lie to me, the goblins will know, their wards detect deception. If you refuse to answer, that will be answer enough. Understood? Dumbledore's expression was unreadable. He inclined his head. Did you know that Voldemort targeted my family specifically because of the Pendragon bloodline, not just the prophecy? A long pause. I had reason to suspect it, yes. Did you intend to tell me about my inheritance before my 17th birthday? A longer pause. I intended to tell you what you needed to know, when you needed to know it. That's not an answer. No, Dumbledore whispered. I suppose it isn't. Last question. Harry met those blue eyes without flinching. The word you used. Horcruxes. Is there one in me? The corridor went deathly silent. Even the goblins seemed to hold their breath. Dumbledore's face crumbled, there was no other word for it. The careful architecture of control and composure simply fell apart, and underneath was an old man who was tired and guilty and afraid. There was, he said. Harry's blood went cold. Was. The scar. It contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul. That's why you could speak Parseltongue, why you had the connection to his mind. It was, Dumbledore's voice caught. I believed it would need to be destroyed. I believed that when the time came, you would need to die. Sacrifice yourself, knowing you would likely survive due to, likely. Dumbledore flinched. You were going to send me to die on a likely. Harry's voice was so cold that frost actually formed on the stone walls around them. He didn't notice. You were fattening me up for the slaughter, and you didn't even have the decency to be sure it would work. It was the only way I could see, you didn't look hard enough. Harry held up his right hand. The Lul Fey ring manifested on his finger, blazing with a pale silver light, and he felt its magic flowing through him, ancient, arcane, beyond anything taught at Hogwarts. And he knew, suddenly, with a certainty that went bone deep, that the Horcrux was gone. The Lul Fey ring had burned it out the moment it bonded to him. The claiming ritual had purified his blood, his magic, his very soul. It's gone. The fragment. The Lul Fei ring destroyed it when it bonded to me. Your Horcrux problem, at least the one in my head, is solved. No sacrifice required. Dumbledore stared at him. That's not possible. Director Ragnarok, Harry said without turning. Ragnarok stepped forward. His expression could have curdled milk. Our scans confirm it. There is no foreign soul presence in his grace. The ritual purified him completely. His grace, Dumbledore repeated quietly. Oh, did I not mention? Harry's smile was thin and sharp and utterly without warmth. I've claimed the Pendragon line. The crown is active. And your 600 years of temporary government just got a lot more complicated. For the first time in Harry's experience, Albus Dumbledore had absolutely nothing to say. I'm leaving, Harry said. I'm going to Potter Manor. I am not going back to the Dursleys. I am not going back to Hogwarts until I decide whether Hogwarts is somewhere I want to be. You no longer have any legal authority over me. The emancipation was automatic with the claiming. I will be reviewing everything. Every decision you've made on my behalf, every vault transaction, every proxy vote. If I find theft, you'll answer to the goblins. If I find treason, he paused, letting the weight of that word fill the corridor. Well. I suppose we'll see. He turned and walked away. Neville fell into step beside him, and the goblin guards formed up around them, an honor guard, Harry realized. A king's escort. Behind them, Dumbledore's voice floated down the corridor, soft and broken. I did love you, Harry. Like a grandson. Harry stopped. He didn't turn around. You don't send your grandchildren to die, Professor. He kept walking. They emerged from Gringotts into morning sunlight, and the alley was awake now. People were everywhere, shopping, chatting, going about their lives, and they all turned to stare as Harry walked out through the bronze doors flanked by an armed goblin escort. He'd taken his hood down. There was no point hiding anymore. The scar was visible, his head was high, and the 7 rings, all manifested now, gleaming on his fingers, caught the light like small fires. The effect was immediate and electric. People stopped mid-step. A witch dropped her shopping. Someone whispered, Potter, and the name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in water. Harry walked down the white marble steps, and the crowd parted before him, not from fear, exactly, but from some deep, instinctive recognition. The magic was visible now, a faint golden aura that shimmered around him in the sunlight, and even people who didn't know what the rings meant could feel that something fundamental had shifted. Lord Potter. A reporter, Rita Skeeter, because of course it was Rita Bloody Skeeter, materialized from behind a pillar, quick quotes Quill already scribbling. Lord Potter, is it true that you've undergone an inheritance ritual? Can you comment on, Ms. Skeeter? Harry stopped and looked at her, and she actually took a step back. Something in his eyes, perhaps. Or the magic. Or the 4 armed goblins. I've just discovered that I am the lord of 7 ancient houses and the rightful king of magical Britain. I've also discovered that this has been kept from me deliberately for 3 years by people I trusted. I'm going to be making some changes. You can print that. He kept walking. Behind him, he heard Rita Skeeter's quill snap in half from writing too fast. At the end of the alley, just before the entrance to the leaky cauldron, Neville touched his arm. Harry. Are you actually okay? Harry considered the question honestly. He was the heir to 7 houses. He was somehow a king. He'd just told off Albus Dumbledore in front of a goblin audience. Voldemort was out there, afraid of him for reasons Harry was only beginning to understand. His scar was silent. His hands were full of rings and power and possibility, and for the first time in his life, no one was telling him what to do. I'm bloody terrified, Harry said. And then he grinned, a real grin, wide and fierce and alive. But Neville, I think terrified might be exactly where I need to be. Come on. Let's go find out what a Potter Manor looks like. They stepped through the pub and out into Muggle London, where the sun was shining and the traffic was humming and the world had no idea that its hidden half had just been turned upside down. The leaky cauldron's door swung shut behind them with a sound like a closing chapter. Potter Manor announced itself before they even saw it. The port key, provided by Ragnarok, keyed to Harry's blood, unusable by anyone else, dropped them in a rolling Welsh valley that smelled like wild thyme and rain-soaked earth. For a moment, there was nothing, just green hills, a grey sky, and the distant bleating of sheep. Then Harry felt something pull at him, a tugging behind his breastbone, and the air in front of them rippled. Wards. Massive, ancient wards, the kind that made the air taste like ozone. They were asking him a question, Harry realized, not in words, but in magic. Who are you? He held up his hand. The Potter ring blazed. The wards didn't just open. They sang. A harmonic resonance that Harry felt in his teeth, a vibration so deep it was almost subsonic, and the empty valley transformed. One moment, hills and sheep. The next, an estate that took his breath away. The manor house was enormous but not ostentatious, grey stone covered in ivy, with tall windows that caught the light, surrounded by gardens that had been maintained by house elves for 14 years without a master. There were outbuildings, a Quidditch pitch that made Harry's heart stutter, greenhouses, a lake, and beyond it all, forests that rolled to the horizon. The whole property hummed with protective magic so dense it was almost visible. Bloody hell, Neville said reverently. A sharp crack split the air, and suddenly there were house elves everywhere, 5, 10, 20 of them, popping into existence around Harry, and every single one was crying. The one in front was old, with enormous ears and a pillowcase emblazoned with the Potter crest. She looked up at Harry with swimming eyes and said, in a voice that cracked and wobbled, Master Harry has come home. Harry knelt down. He didn't think about it. He just did it. What's your name? Mipsy, Master Harry. Head elf of Potter Manor. We has been waiting. We has been keeping everything ready. 14 years, Master Harry, and we never stopped. You've done brilliantly, Mipsy. Thank you. The elf burst into fresh sobs and was immediately comforted by 3 others. Harry straightened up and looked at the house, his family's house, the place where his grandparents had lived and his father had grown up, and something in him settled. Not the grief, not the anger. Those were still there. But beneath them, for the first time, a foundation. Something solid. Something his. Neville, he said. You said your gran drilled pure-blood politics into you. Every day since I was 6. Good. Because I need to learn everything you know, and I need to learn it fast. Dumbledore's going to regroup. Fudge is going to panic. And Voldemort, he paused. Through the silent scar, through the connection that remained even with the Horcrux gone, a faint, distant echo of rage and something that tasted like fear. Voldemort already knows. Neville cracked his knuckles. Then we'd better get started. They walked through the front doors of Potter Manor together, and the house lit up around them, every chandelier, every torch, every enchanted window blazing to life as if the building itself was exhaling after holding its breath for 14 years. Harry Potter was home. And the world was about to find out what happened when you gave a weapon a crown and told it the truth. By midday, Harry had done 4 things. He'd explored enough of the manor to understand that enormous was an understatement. The house had 63 rooms, a library that Hermione would have sold a kidney for, a dueling chamber, a potions lab that would have made Snape weep, and a master bedroom suite with a balcony overlooking the entire valley. The portraits were awake and overjoyed, 3 generations of Potters, all talking at once, all wanting to see him, all confirming pieces of the story that Gringotts had begun. His grandfather, Fleamont Potter, a sharp-eyed man with Harry's untidy hair, had taken one look at him, said, "You look like James but you stand like Lily," and then burst into tears. He'd written 2 letters. One to Sirius, short and urgent, "Come to Potter Manor. I know about the will. I know about everything. The wards will let you through. One to Hermione, something's happened. Something big. I need your brain. Can you come? Reply to this address, Potter Manor, Carmarthenshire. Yes, it's real. Yes, it's mine. I'll explain when you're here. He had not written to Ron. He would, eventually, but Ron's reaction to the tournament was still a wound that hadn't fully healed, and Harry wasn't sure he trusted Ron not to tell his parents, who would tell Dumbledore. Later. Ron could come later. He'd gone through the financial records that Ragnarok had provided, a stack of parchment 3 inches thick, and discovered that Dumbledore had been withdrawing from the Potter Vault since 1981. Not large amounts. Nothing that would trigger goblin auditing thresholds. But consistent, steady withdrawals that over 14 years added up to nearly 2 million galleons, all routed to something called the Order of the Phoenix Operating Fund. Harry didn't know what the Order of the Phoenix was. But he was going to find out. The fourth thing he'd done was the most important. He sat in the study, his father's study, his grandfather's study, lined with books and smelling of old leather and cedar, and he laid out the Pendragon ring on the desk and stared at it for a long time. The crown wasn't just a title. The parchment at Gringotts had said the kingship could be claimed by declaration. That meant it wasn't automatic. He had the blood, he had the right, but the actual claiming was a choice. He could walk away from it. Take the houses, take the money, take the seats, and leave the crown dormant for another 600 years. No one would blame him. He was 15 years old. He'd been fighting for his life since he was 11. He was allowed to be tired. But Voldemort was out there. And Fudge was going to deny it. And Dumbledore, even well-meaning Dumbledore, had proven that he would sacrifice Harry on the altar of the greater good without a second thought. The system was broken. It had been broken since the last king died, and 6 centuries of temporary government had produced the Death Eaters, the pure-blood supremacists, the corruption, the neglect of magical creatures, the persecution of werewolves, the subjugation of goblins, the entire mess that had allowed someone like Voldemort to rise not once but twice. Harry picked up the ring. It was warm in his palm, almost alive. "Neville," he called. Neville appeared in the doorway, a sandwich in one hand and a book on wizarding law in the other. "Yeah. If I do this, if I declare the crown active, what happens?" Neville set the sandwich down carefully. "Chaos. Absolute, total chaos. The ministry's legal authority evaporates overnight. Every law passed in 600 years technically needs royal assent to be valid. The Wizengamot becomes an advisory body, not a governing one. Fudge goes from minister to, basically a civil servant." He paused. "But Harry, you also become responsible. For all of it. Every witch and wizard in Britain looks to you. I know. And you'd be painting the biggest target in history on your back. Bigger than the one that's already there. I know that too." Neville studied him for a long moment. "You've already decided, haven't you?" Harry slid the Pendragon ring onto his finger. It flared once, golden and absolute, and somewhere deep beneath the manor, in the bedrock of Wales, in the old magic that had predated Hogwarts and the ministry and everything built on top of it, something shifted. A tremor ran through the wards of every magical dwelling in Britain. In Hogwarts, the suits of armor stood to attention. In the ministry, the fountain of magical brethren cracked straight down the middle. In a dark house in Little Hangleton, Voldemort screamed. Harry felt it all. Every magical boundary, every ward line, every ley node, the entire infrastructure of magical Britain, reaching for its king like a circuit finally completed. "Yeah," Harry said. "I have." Through the study window, the sun broke through the Welsh clouds, and Potter Manor gleamed like something out of a legend. Which, Harry supposed, it now was. He had a kingdom to fix, a dark lord to destroy, and a headmaster to hold accountable. He was 15, he was furious, and he was done being anyone's pawn. The game had changed. Chapter 2, The Court Assembles. Sirius arrived first. He came through the front gates at a dead sprint in dog form, skidded across the gravel drive, and transformed mid-stride into a wild-eyed man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Harry was on the front steps, and Sirius grabbed him in a hug so fierce it lifted him off his feet. "You mad, brilliant, impossible kid," Sirius said into his hair. "You absolute lunatic. Do you have any idea what you've done? Got a pretty solid picture, yeah." Sirius pulled back, hands on Harry's shoulders, and really looked at him. Harry watched the moment land, the moment Sirius saw the rings humming beneath his skin, felt the magic rolling off him like heat from a forge. His godfather's expression went through about 6 stages in 3 seconds: shock, awe, pride, fury, grief, and finally something that settled into a grim, savage satisfaction. "Dumbledore kept the will sealed," Sirius said. "It wasn't a question. Since '93. I filed it in person. Walked into Gringotts under Polyjuice, the year I escaped. Named you my heir, named you a black, made it ironclad. The goblins confirmed it was received and registered. And that old bastard just," Sirius's jaw worked. 13 years in Azkaban. No trial. And even after I escaped, even after he knew I was innocent, he left me rotting in that house while he sat on a document that would have given you a home, a family, me, I know." Harry gripped his godfather's arm. "I know, Sirius. And we're going to deal with it. But right now I need you here, with me, because I'm about to pick a fight with every power structure in magical Britain and I need someone who's actually been in a war." Sirius barked a laugh. Actual, genuine, reckless laughter, the laugh of a man who'd had nothing to lose for so long that having something to fight for was intoxicating. "You sound like your dad." "No, you sound like your mum." James would have charged in yelling. Lily would have drawn up a plan and then charged in yelling. Glad to be a mix, then. They went inside, and Harry introduced Sirius to the house he should have grown up visiting. The portraits went mad. Fleamont Potter nearly fell out of his frame trying to get a better look at Sirius, shouting about how thin he was, while Euphemia Potter, Harry's grandmother, a regal woman with kind eyes, said very quietly, "Welcome home, Sirius. You were always family." Sirius had to leave the room for a minute after that. Neville very tactfully pretended to be fascinated by a bookshelf. Hermione arrived 2 hours later by a portkey that Ragnarok had keyed to the wards at Harry's request. She appeared in the entrance hall, stumbled, caught herself on a suit of armor, and immediately said, "Harry James Potter, your letter was exactly 3 sentences long and contained no useful information whatsoever and I have been going out of my mind." Then she saw the rings. Then she saw the manor. Then she saw Harry's face, and something in her expression shifted from exasperation to the sharp, focused intensity that meant her brain was already working the problem. "Tell me everything," she said. So he did. They sat in the study, Harry behind the desk, Hermione and Neville in armchairs, Sirius sprawled on a sofa with a fire whiskey he'd found in the liquor cabinet, and Harry laid it all out. The ritual, the 7 houses, the Pendragon line, the Horcrux that had been in his scar, Dumbledore's suppression, the financial irregularities, the Crown Declaration. All of it. He didn't soften it or dress it up. He just told the truth, and the truth was damning enough on its own. Hermione listened without interrupting. This was, Harry knew, the most alarming version of Hermione, the silent one. When she was yelling, she was processing. When she was quiet, she was building. When he finished, she was still for a long moment. Then she said, "The Wizengamot seats. That's the first move." Neville sat forward. "Exactly what I said. 7 seats is enormous. The Wizengamot has, what, around 50 voting members. 7 seats is enough to block any legislation, enough to force votes, enough to demand hearings. And if the Pendragon authority is valid, you don't just have seats, you have veto power over the entire body." "There's going to be pushback," Sirius said from the sofa. He was staring at the ceiling, but his voice was sharp. Fudge won't accept it. The old pureblood families, the Malfoys, the Knots, the ones who bought their influence, they'll fight it. And Dumbledore has allies on the Wizengamot. People who trust him, who'll do what he says. Then we go before they have time to organize. Harry pulled over a piece of parchment. When's the next Wizengamot session? Neville and Sirius answered simultaneously, tomorrow. They looked at each other. Neville continued, summer session. They meet weekly through July and August to clear the legislative backlog before the Hogwarts term. Tomorrow's a regular session, budget allocations, mostly. Nobody important shows up. Perfect. Harry was already writing. Nobody important means no preparation. We walk in, I claim my seats, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's legally done. Hermione drummed her fingers on the armchair. You need a solicitor. A good one. Someone who knows the old laws, the ones the ministry's been ignoring. The Potters keep a family solicitor on retainer, Sirius said. Or they did. Firm called Greengrass and Associates. Everyone went quiet for a beat. Neville made a small, thoughtful sound. Greengrass. As in Daphne Greengrass? As in the Greengrass family has been handling old-line pureblood legal work for centuries, yeah. Sirius swung his legs off the sofa. They're not Death Eaters. They're not Dumbledore's people. They're neutral, aggressively, professionally, profitably neutral. If there's a family in Britain that knows the legal framework around the dormant crown, it's them. I'll contact them, Harry said. He paused, quill hovering. Actually, Neville, you said something in Gringotts. About old families waiting. What did you mean? Neville chose his words carefully. Gran never said it outright. But there were hints, things she'd say after her third sherry, things I'd overhear from other family heads at ministry functions. Some of the old families, not the dark ones, not Dumbledore's people, the old ones, have always believed the crown would return. They passed it down as a family secret. When the king returns, be ready. Gran used to say it like a toast sometimes, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. The Greengrasses? Hermione asked. Probably. The Bones family almost certainly. The Abbotts. Maybe the Longbottoms, though Gran would hex me for saying it. He shrugged. They called themselves royalists, in the old days. Before the ministry made it unfashionable. Harry set down the quill. Then let's find out who our friends are. He wrote a single letter, addressed it to Lord Cyrus Greengrass, and sent it with one of the manor's owls, a magnificent eagle owl that had been waiting 14 years for a delivery. The response came in 40 minutes. It was hand-delivered. Mipsy appeared in the study doorway, vibrating with barely contained excitement, and announced, Lord Greengrass and Miss Greengrass is here, Master Harry. They is in the entrance hall. Lord Greengrass is saying, she paused, and her enormous eyes got even bigger, he is saying, the long wait is over. Harry stood. Sirius stood. Neville stood. Hermione, who hadn't met any Greengrasses and was therefore the calmest person in the room, also stood and straightened her jumper. They went to the entrance hall. Lord Cyrus Greengrass was a tall man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of face that gave away nothing. He wore immaculate robes of deep blue, and his bearing had the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades navigating dangerous waters without ever capsizing. He stood just inside the front doors, hands clasped behind his back, and when Harry entered, those sharp grey eyes swept over him with the efficiency of a master jeweler appraising a stone. Beside him stood Daphne Greengrass. Harry knew her by sight. You couldn't attend Hogwarts for 4 years without being generally aware of everyone in your year, but he'd never paid much attention. Slytherin, blonde, kept to herself, allegedly called the Ice Queen behind her back. She was taller than he expected, with pale hair pulled back severely from a face that was striking rather than pretty, all sharp angles and cool intelligence. Her eyes were the same gray as her father's, and they landed on Harry with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Lord Potter," Cyrus said. His voice was measured and calm. "Or should I say, Your Grace? Harry's fine for now. Thank you for coming so quickly. I've been ready for this meeting for 30 years. There was no irony in his voice. He said it the way someone might say the sun came up this morning, simple fact. He stepped forward and, without fanfare, without drama, went to one knee. "The House of Greengrass has held an oath to the Pendragon crown since the founding of the Wizengamot. 600 years of silence. 600 years of watching the ministry butcher everything the crown built." He looked up at Harry with eyes that burned. "I, Cyrus Aldrin Greengrass, Lord of the ancient House of Greengrass, reaffirm my family's oath. My house, my wand, my counsel, they are yours." The magic in the room shifted. Harry felt the oath land, felt it connect to the Pendragon ring like a key sliding into a lock. Something ancient acknowledged the bond, and the wards of Potter Manor hummed a note of recognition. "Rise," Harry said, and the word came naturally, as if the Pendragon magic was feeding him the protocol. "Your oath is accepted and honored, Lord Greengrass." Cyrus stood, and for the first time, something human broke through the diplomat's mask, a flash of fierce, almost desperate relief. The look of a man who'd spent his entire life preparing for a moment he'd secretly feared would never come. Daphne hadn't knelt. She stood slightly behind her father, watching Harry with those cool gray eyes, and when the oath was done and the magic settled, she spoke for the first time. "You're going to the Wizengamot tomorrow." It wasn't a question. Harry met her gaze. "Yes. Have you given any thought to what happens after you walk in? Because walking in is the easy part. Fudge will challenge your claim. Dumbledore, if he's there, will try to reframe the narrative. The dark families will see you as a threat. The light families will see you as a disruption. You'll have about 90 seconds between claiming your seats and someone trying to have you declared incompetent, arrested, or both." "Daphne," her father said quietly. "He needs to hear it." "She's right," Harry said. "What do you suggest?" Something shifted in Daphne's expression. Not warmth, not quite, more like the first crack in a glacier. Recognition that the person in front of her was actually listening. "Don't go alone. Bring Lord Black, he's your godfather, and the Black seat is one of the 7. Bring Heir Longbottom as your sworn companion. And bring documentation. Not just the Gringotts parchment, bring the financial records, the sealed will, the suppressed notifications. Don't just claim your seats. Put Dumbledore on the defensive from the moment you open your mouth. And Fudge? Fudge is a coward. Cowards only fight when they think they'll win. Show him he can't win, and he'll fold. The trick is showing him fast enough that he doesn't do something stupid first." Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Cyrus. "I'd like to hire your firm to represent my interests, Lord Greengrass. All 7 houses. It would be my honor. And I'd like your daughter to come to the Wizengamot tomorrow." Daphne's glacier cracked a little further. "Why?" "Because everyone else in this room is on my side because they care about me. That's valuable. But you're on my side because you've been thinking about this for years, and you're the only person who walked in here and immediately started wargaming the opposition. I need that." Daphne Greengrass looked at Harry Potter, really looked, for the first time, past the scar and the legend and the boy she'd spent 4 years watching from across the Great Hall, and something recalibrated behind her eyes. "Fine," she said. "But I'm not kneeling. Didn't ask you to." "Good. Then we have work to do." She pulled a chair up to the study desk without being invited and produced a leather folio from her bag. "Father, you should explain the Royalist network. Granger, I assume you're the research brain. I need everything you can find on precedent for Crown authority superseding ministry law. Longbottom, you know the Wizengamot chamber layout. Where are we sitting? Neville blinked. I'm going. I just said I was going. Keep up. Hermione was staring at Daphne with an expression that was either the beginning of a beautiful friendship or an intense academic rivalry. Possibly both. I have questions about the legal framework, ask them while we work. We have 16 hours. Harry sat back and watched his court assemble itself. That's what it was, he realized. Not a club, not a friend group, not the DA or the Order or any of the half-formed alliances he'd stumbled through before. A court. Sirius, who knew war and sacrifice. Neville, who knew duty and loyalty. Hermione, who knew everything else. Cyrus, who knew the system from the inside. And Daphne, who apparently knew how to weaponize all of it. He pulled the financial records toward him and got to work. The night that followed was the most productive of Harry's life. Cyrus Greengrass laid out the royalist network with the precision of a spy coming in from the cold. 12 families, he said, had maintained the old oath in secret, passed down from parent to child, generation after generation, waiting. The Greengrasses. The Bones family, which explained a lot about Amelia Bones and her relentless integrity at the DMLE. The Abbotts. The Longbottoms, as Neville had suspected. The Devises. The Macmillans. Others. Not all of them would come forward immediately, some were cautious, some were compromised, some had married into families that wouldn't be sympathetic, but the core was solid. 12 families, Harry said. How many Wizengamot seats between them? 15, roughly, Cyrus said. Plus your 7. That's 22 seats that we can reasonably count on, with more to follow once people see which way the wind is blowing. That's nearly half the body, Hermione said, looking up from a stack of legal texts she'd found in the Potter library. In a full session, you'd need 26 for a simple majority. A full session never happens, Neville said. He'd produced a detailed map of the Wizengamot chamber from somewhere and was marking seat positions with his wand. Summer sessions usually have 30 to 35 members present. 22 out of 35 is a commanding majority. Assuming Fudge doesn't pack the chamber, Daphne said. She was writing at furious speed, a brief of some kind. Once he hears what's happening, he'll try to fill seats with loyalists. We need to move fast enough that he can't. Sirius, who had been pacing by the fireplace, stopped. I still don't have a trial. The black seat, I can claim it because of the will, but the moment I walk into the Wizengamot, they'll try to arrest me. No. Harry didn't look up from the financial records. You've been pardoned. Everyone stared at him. Harry held up a piece of parchment. Ragnarok sent this over an hour ago. Part of the Pendragon authority is the right of royal pardon, immediate, unilateral, cannot be overridden by the ministry. I signed it before dinner. Sirius Orion Black is formally pardoned of all charges by the Crown of Magical Britain. The goblins have filed it and it's legally binding regardless of whether the ministry recognizes the Crown, because the pardon predates the ministry's legal framework. It's older law. It supersedes. Sirius stared at the parchment in Harry's hand. His mouth opened. Closed. His voice cracked. He tried again. It should have been done 12 years ago. Someone should have fought for you. No one did. So I am. Harry finally looked up, and his eyes were bright and fierce. You're a free man, Sirius. Officially, legally, permanently. Sirius sat down heavily on the arm of the sofa. He ran his hands through his hair, and they were shaking, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. Neville quietly looked away. Hermione wiped her eyes. Daphne kept writing, but her quill had gone still for just a moment. James would be proud of you, Sirius said finally, and his voice was rough and broken and full of something that sounded like the beginning of healing. I hope so. Harry cleared his throat. Now. Let's talk about what I'm going to say tomorrow. They planned through the night. Daphne turned out to be terrifyingly good at political strategy. She'd been studying the Wizengamot the way Hermione studied Transfiguration, obsessively and with total recall. She knew the voting patterns, the alliances, the grudges, the leverage points. She knew which members owed debts to whom, which ones could be swayed by self-interest, which ones would fight to the end out of principle. Amelia Bones is your biggest potential ally outside the royalist families, Daphne said around 2 in the morning. They were all running on tea and adrenaline, spread around the study like a war council. She's fair, she's powerful, and she's been fighting Fudge's corruption for years without enough support. If you can convince her you're legitimate, she'll bring the DMLE with her. And if I can't? Then she'll try to arrest you for sedition, and things get complicated. Right. What about Malfoy? Daphne's expression cooled several degrees. Lucius Malfoy holds one seat and controls 3 others through proxy and intimidation. He's also a Death Eater, but proving that is another matter. He'll oppose you on principle. A legitimate monarch threatens everything Voldemort is trying to build. But he's smart enough not to act openly. He'll work through proxies, through Fudge, through the Prophet. Unless I give him a reason not to. What kind of reason? Harry pulled over the Slytherin ring and let it manifest on his finger. The emerald caught the candlelight. I hold the Slytherin seat by right of magical conquest. That means I'm the head of House Slytherin. Every family that traces its lineage through Slytherin, the Gaunts, the Malfoys through marriage, half the Sacred 28, they're technically my vassals. Old law. Very old law. Daphne stared at him. Then she stared at the ring. Then she started laughing, a sharp, incredulous sound that transformed her entire face and made her look suddenly and disarmingly young. You're going to walk into the Wizengamot and tell Lucius Malfoy he works for you. I'm going to walk into the Wizengamot and remind him that his lord works for me. Voldemort claims the Slytherin legacy. I hold it. By goblin-verified blood right. If Malfoy is a Slytherin loyalist, his loyalty belongs to the head of House Slytherin. If he's a Voldemort loyalist, he's following a pretender. Harry leaned back in his chair. Either way, I win. Neville was shaking his head slowly, grinning. Hermione looked like she was trying to decide between pride and terror. Sirius had a gleam in his eye that suggested he was already composing the look he was going to give Lucius Malfoy's face. There's one more thing, Harry said, and his voice went quiet in a way that drew everyone's attention. Dumbledore. If he's there tomorrow, and I think he will be, he won't stay away from something this big. I need to decide how to handle him. The room went still. He's not evil, Harry said. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easier if he was. A villain I could fight. But Dumbledore genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. He suppressed my inheritance because he thought I needed to be a weapon, not a king. He kept me at the Dursleys because he thought suffering would make me noble. He was grooming me to die, and he was sad about it, which somehow makes it worse. He's the most powerful wizard in Britain, Sirius said. Arguably the world. If he decides to fight this, he won't. Daphne's voice was certain. Dumbledore fights in the shadows. Manipulation, maneuvering, control of information. He won't oppose the crown openly because it would destroy his reputation. His power comes from being the wise, benevolent leader. If he's seen fighting a legitimate king, a 15-year-old king who was abused under his watch, he loses everything. So what do I do? Daphne met his eyes. Give him a way out. A graceful way to step aside. Make it clear that you know what he did, and make it equally clear that you're willing to let him retire with his dignity intact if he cooperates. Dumbledore's not afraid of power. He's afraid of being seen for what he really is. Harry considered this. And if he doesn't take the way out? Then you show everyone what he really is. You have the documentation. The financial records alone would end his career. But the Horcrux, she paused, choosing her words with unusual care. If Dumbledore knew there was a piece of Voldemort's soul in your head and his plan was for you to die to destroy it, that's not just dereliction of duty. That's conspiracy to commit murder of a minor under his guardianship. Even the most loyal Dumbledore supporter can't spin that. The study was very quiet. Outside, the Welsh night pressed against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "I don't want to destroy him," Harry said. "I just want him to stop. Then give him the choice." Daphne closed her folio. "That's more mercy than he gave you." They worked until dawn. Harry sent messages through the Greengrass network to the royalist families, brief, coded, using phrases Cyrus provided that would be recognized by anyone who held the old oath. By 6 in the morning, he'd received responses from 8 of the 12 families. All confirmed. All would be present at the Wizengamot session. All said, in their various ways, the same thing, at last. At 7, Harry stood on the balcony of the master bedroom and watched the sun come up over the Welsh hills. The valley was gold and green and impossibly beautiful, and the wards sang softly around him, a constant, reassuring presence. He could feel the Pendragon magic in the earth beneath the manor, in the ley lines that ran through the bedrock, in the ancient pulse of a kingdom that had been sleeping and was now, inch by inch, waking up. Neville found him there. "It's time." Harry turned from the sunrise. He was wearing new robes, black, simple, perfectly tailored, taken from a wardrobe in the master suite that had adjusted to his size the moment he opened it. The Potter crest was embroidered over his heart, small and precise, and the 7 rings gleamed on his fingers, fully manifested. He looked, for the first time, exactly like what he was. "How do I look?" he asked. Neville studied him. "Like someone who's about to change the world." "Good enough." He headed for the stairs. "Let's go change it." The Ministry of Magic's atrium was bustling at 9 in the morning, and nobody noticed them at first. Harry had planned the entrance carefully, or rather, Daphne had planned it, with the precision of a military campaign. They arrived through the visitors' entrance, all 6 of them, Harry, Sirius, Neville, Hermione, Daphne, and Cyrus. Hermione and Daphne were technically there as aides, since they didn't hold seats, but Daphne had pointed out that their presence sent a message. A Muggleborn and a Slytherin, standing together behind the king. Make people think about what that means. They made it halfway across the atrium before someone screamed. It was the security wizard at the wand check desk. He'd looked up, seen Sirius Black walking calmly through the Ministry of Magic, and reacted accordingly. Within seconds, 4 Aurors had materialized from the DMLE corridor, wands drawn, and the atrium had erupted into chaos. "Freeze! Sirius Black, you are under arrest." "No," Harry said, "he isn't." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Pendragon magic flowed through the word and the building responded, the fountains, newly repaired, Harry noticed, after the original had cracked the day before, went still, the lift stopped moving, and the magical ambient lights dimmed to a focused glow that centered on Harry like a spotlight. The Aurors hesitated. Harry stepped forward, and the crowd in the atrium parted like water. He pulled a scroll from his robes, the pardon, sealed with the Pendragon crest, and held it out. Sirius Black has been pardoned by royal authority under the Pendragon Charter of Sovereignty, which predates the Ministry of Magic by 400 years. This pardon is legally binding, magically sealed, and non-negotiable. He let his gaze sweep the frozen Aurors. He also never received a trial, which you might want to look into. The lead Auror, a stocky witch with close-cropped hair and hard eyes, snatched the scroll and read it. Her expression went through a rapid evolution, suspicion, confusion, recognition, and then a sharp intake of breath as the magical seal authenticated itself against her wand. This is a royal seal. There hasn't been a royal seal in 600 years. Yes. There's a lot of that going around. Harry walked past her. We're here for the Wizengamot session. I'd suggest clearing a path. They didn't clear a path. They did something better, they followed. By the time Harry reached the lifts, he had a trail of ministry workers, Aurors, and bewildered bureaucrats streaming behind him like the tail of a comet. Word was spreading through the building at the speed of gossip, which in the ministry was roughly the speed of light. The Wizengamot chamber was in the lowest levels of the ministry, a vast, circular room with tiered seating rising in concentric rings around a central floor. The seats were ancient stone, each carved with the crest of the family that held it, and the ceiling was enchanted to show a slowly turning sky. When Harry entered through the main doors, the session was already in progress. It was, as Neville had predicted, a thin attendance. About 30 members, scattered across the tiers, listening to a minor functionary drone about cauldron thickness regulations. Fudge sat in the minister's box, looking bored. Dumbledore sat in the chief warlock's chair, high above the floor, and his eyes snapped to Harry the instant the doors opened. Harry walked to the center of the floor. His footsteps echoed. The functionary trailed off mid-sentence. 30 heads turned. Fudge sat up straight, his lime green bowler hat slipping. And in the tiered seating, Harry saw them, the royalists. Augusta Longbottom, sitting ramrod straight, her vulture hat slightly askew from how quickly she turned. Amelia Bones, monocle flashing. Edgar Abbott, the elderly head of the Abbott family, who was gripping the arms of his seat with white-knuckled hands. More faces, more families, scattered across the chamber like hidden cards suddenly turned face up. "This session is in progress," Fudge said, finding his voice. "You can't simply walk in here, I can, actually." Harry's voice carried without effort. "Under the charter of the Wizengamot, any holder of a hereditary seat may enter the chamber and claim that seat at any time, without prior notice. I'm here to claim mine." He pulled the Gringotts parchment from his robes and held it up. It unrolled dramatically, the whole thing, all 7 houses, the full accounting, and floated in the air above the central floor, projected in golden light for the entire chamber to read. 30 seconds of absolute, thundering silence. Then everyone started talking at once. "Order." Fudge was banging his gavel so hard it cracked. "Order, I say. This is preposterous. Potter, you are a child, you cannot. I am emancipated by right of lordship under the Magical Inheritance Act of 1387, Harry said calmly. Verified by blood ritual at Gringotts, witnessed by Director Ragnarok himself. I hold the lordships of Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Pendragon, and Lefay. I claim my 7 hereditary seats on this body." He turned slowly, looking up at the tiered seating. 7 seats, scattered across the chamber, some of them occupied by proxy holders who were now staring at Harry with expressions of dawning horror, began to glow. The crests carved into their stone backs flared with light, one by one, as the ancient magic of the chamber recognized its rightful holder. The proxy holders didn't have a choice. The seat simply rejected them, a polite but irresistible magical force that lifted them gently but firmly out of the chairs and set them on their feet in the aisle. One of them was Lucius Malfoy's wife, Narcissa, who had been voting the black seat. She stumbled, caught herself, and turned to stare at Harry with an expression that mixed outrage and something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "This is outrageous." A voice from the upper tiers, Lucius Malfoy himself, on his feet, white blonde hair swinging. "A 15-year-old boy cannot hold 1 seat, let alone 7. I demand verification. The verification is floating in front of your face, Lord Malfoy." Harry pointed at the projected parchment. Gringotts seal. Goblin-verified blood ritual. Unless you're suggesting the goblins are fraudulent, in which case I imagine they'd like a word with you about your vault security. A ripple of laughter, quickly suppressed. Malfoy's face went a shade of pink that clashed with his complexion. Furthermore, Harry continued, and now he turned to face Malfoy directly, I notice you've been occupying a seat that belongs to a family with ties to House Slytherin. I am the head of House Slytherin, Lord Malfoy. By right of magical conquest, 3 times over, if you're counting. The old vassal oaths are still binding. Would you like to discuss your family's obligations, or shall we save that for a private meeting? Malfoy sat down. He sat down fast, and something behind his eyes recalculated with visible speed. Chief Warlock. Harry turned to Dumbledore. The old man hadn't moved. He sat in his elevated chair, hands folded, watching Harry with those blue eyes that seemed to see everything and betray nothing. I believe you have something of mine. 7 somethings, in fact. You've been voting my seats by proxy without my knowledge or authorization. The Gringotts records confirm this. I'm formally revoking all proxy assignments and requesting, he let just a shade of ice enter his voice, a full accounting of every vote cast on my behalf. Dumbledore's silence stretched. The chamber held its breath. Then the old man inclined his head, just slightly, and said, I acknowledge your claim, Lord Potter. 4 words. But the weight of them landed like a boulder in a still pond. Dumbledore could have fought. Could have challenged, delayed, obstructed. Instead, he acknowledged, which meant everyone watching knew that even Albus Dumbledore recognized Harry's legitimacy. It was the smartest possible move, Harry realized. By conceding gracefully, Dumbledore avoided the documentation Harry was ready to deploy. By acknowledging the claim, he positioned himself as a supporter rather than an opponent. It was a masterstroke of political judo, turning retreat into an advance. He's good, Harry thought. But I'm not done. Thank you, Chief Warlock. Harry turned back to the chamber at large. I'm also here to formally activate the dormant Pendragon title and claim the authority of the Crown of Magical Britain. This time, the silence was so absolute that Harry could hear the enchanted ceiling turning. Fudge stood up so fast his chair fell over. Now see here, this is fantasy. The crown hasn't existed in 600 years. The Ministry of Magic is the legitimate governing body. The Ministry of Magic was established as a temporary governing body until the Pendragon line was restored, Cyrus Greengrass said from the gallery, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who'd spent 30 years preparing this argument. Article 1 of the Wizengamot Charter of 1407 states, and I quote, "This body shall govern in the Crown's absence and shall yield authority upon the Crown's return." There is no expiration clause. There is no amendment nullifying this article. It stands. I don't care what some dusty old minister. Amelia Bones was on her feet. Her monocle was practically vibrating. Minister, I have reviewed the relevant law, I review all relevant law, as you know, and Lord Greengrass is correct. The charter is unambiguous. If the Pendragon claim is legitimate, and Gringotts verification has been the accepted standard for bloodline disputes since the Goblin Accords of 1612, then the Crown's authority is legally superior to the Ministry's. Fudge's face was now the color of old parchment. Amelia, you can't possibly, I'm not expressing a political opinion, Minister. I'm stating a legal fact. You can argue politics. You cannot argue law. She turned to Harry, and behind the monocle, her eyes were fierce and bright. Your Grace. If you intend to claim the crown, I would recommend a formal declaration before this body so that the record is clear. Harry looked at her. Looked at the chamber, 30-odd witches and wizards, some terrified, some furious, some barely containing their hope. Looked at Dumbledore, still and watchful. Looked at Fudge, grasping for control of a situation that had left him behind 10 minutes ago. I, Harry James Potter, Lord of the Houses of Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Black, Pendragon, and Lefay, do hereby claim the crown of magical Britain as is my right by blood, by magic, and by law. He raised his right hand, and the Pendragon ring blazed, not just light, but presence, a weight of authority that pressed against every person in the chamber. In the ceiling's enchanted sky, a constellation appeared that hadn't been seen in 6 centuries, the Dragon Crown, 7 stars burning in a circle. The stone floor of the chamber cracked. Not destructively, deliberately. Lines of golden light spread from where Harry stood, racing outward in patterns that matched the old runes of sovereignty, connecting to the seats, the walls, the ancient foundations of the chamber itself. The building recognized its king. "The crown is claimed," Harry said. "The long absence is over." Augusta Longbottom was the first to stand. She rose from her seat, looked Harry dead in the eye, and executed a bow so sharp and precise that it could have cut glass. "The House of Longbottom acknowledges the crown." Edgar Abbott stood. "The House of Abbott acknowledges the crown." One by one, they rose. The royalists, coming out of 600 years of hiding, each one standing and speaking the words that their families had preserved for generations. 8 families. 15 seats. The chamber was splitting in real time, and it was clear which side had the numbers. Amelia Bones stood last. She wasn't a royalist, she was a pragmatist. But she stood, and she said, "The Department of Magical Law Enforcement recognizes the legitimacy of the Pendragon claim under existing law." She turned to Fudge. "Minister, I strongly suggest the ministry do the same." Fudge looked around the chamber. He counted the standing figures, the sitting figures. He did the math. And Daphne had been right. When a coward realized he couldn't win, he folded. "The ministry will take this under advisement," he said weakly. "You'll do more than that," Harry said. "But we can discuss the details later. For now, I have 3 immediate actions." He raised one finger. "First, Sirius Black has been pardoned by royal authority. He will take the Black seat effective immediately, and the ministry will expunge all charges." Second finger. "Second, the proxy voting conducted by Chief Warlock Dumbledore on my seats was unauthorized. I request a full audit of all votes cast, and I formally call for a review of the Chief Warlock's conduct in suppressing the inheritance of a minor under his guardianship." Dumbledore's expression didn't flicker. But Harry saw his hands tighten, just fractionally, on the arms of his chair. Third finger. Third. Voldemort has returned. The chamber erupted. Screams, shouts, people leaping to their feet, Fudge shouting denials, chaos. Harry let it crash around him like a wave against a cliff, and when it began to subside, he spoke again. "I know this because I was there. I fought him. I watched him murder Cedric Diggory. Minister Fudge has spent the past 3 weeks denying this, and every day he denies it, Voldemort grows stronger." He looked at Fudge, and there was nothing merciful in his gaze. "This body will formally acknowledge Voldemort's return and begin preparations for war, or I will use the Crown's authority to dissolve the ministry and handle it myself. You have 1 week." He turned and walked toward the exit. Sirius fell in beside him on his right, Neville on his left. Daphne and Hermione followed, and Cyrus Greengrass brought up the rear with the quiet satisfaction of a man watching his life's work come to fruition. Behind them, the chamber dissolved into chaos. But organized chaos, Harry noticed. Already, factions were forming, conversations were happening, alliances were shifting. The machine of government was creaking into motion in a direction it hadn't moved in 6 centuries. They were in the lift, rising through the ministry levels, when Daphne said, "That went well." Harry looked at her. "That's your version of well? Nobody tried to kill you. In politics, that's a win." Neville snorted. Hermione was already making notes. Sirius was grinning like a man who'd just been let out of prison, which, in a sense, he had. The lift doors opened onto the atrium, which was now packed with ministry workers who'd heard the news. The crowd stared. Harry walked through them without breaking stride, and the crowd parted, and he could hear it starting, the whisper, the word, spreading through the Ministry of Magic like wildfire. "The king has returned." They were nearly to the exit when Harry felt it. A spike of rage, cold and alien, slamming through the scar connection like a fist through glass. Not pain, the Horcrux was gone, so it was no longer agony. But the connection remained, a thread between Harry and Voldemort that transcended soul fragments, and through it, Harry felt Voldemort's reaction to what had just happened. Terror. Absolute, incandescent terror. Not of Harry's power, though that was part of it. Not of the crown, though that was part of it too. No, Voldemort was afraid because the thing he had killed the Potters to prevent, the thing he had sought to claim for himself, the destiny he had tried to steal, had just come to pass despite everything he'd done to stop it. The Pendragon crown was active. And the heir who held it was the same boy who'd survived his killing curse, destroyed his shade, fought him to a standstill in a graveyard, and just walked into the seat of government and taken it. Harry stopped walking. He closed his eyes and reached through the connection, not to read Voldemort's mind, but to send a message. A single, clear thought, pushed through the thread like a note slipped under a door. "I'm coming for you." The response was a blast of fury so intense it made the lights in the atrium flicker. Harry opened his eyes, and he was smiling. "Harry?" Hermione touched his arm. "Are you okay? Your scar, it doesn't hurt anymore." He resumed walking. But Tom Riddle just got the message. They stepped out into Muggle London. The sun was high and warm, the streets were busy with people who had no idea what had just happened, and Harry Potter, the boy who lived, Lord of 7 Houses, High King of Magical Britain, took a deep breath of city air and laughed. "Right," he said. "What's next?" Daphne pulled out a list. An actual, physical, itemized list, already numbered and annotated in her precise handwriting. "Next is the press. You need to control the narrative before the prophet runs whatever garbage Fudge feeds them. I've already drafted a statement." "Of course you have." "After that, we need to formally summon the royalist families to Potter Manor for a council. Then we need to address the Hogwarts situation. You hold the Gryffindor and Slytherin seats, which means you have authority over the school's governance. And we need to start planning for Voldemort's response, because he will respond." "She's terrifying," Sirius murmured to Neville. "Gloriously so," Neville agreed. Harry took the list, scanned it, and tucked it into his robes. "Potter Manor, then. We have a war to win and a kingdom to rebuild. Might as well start now." They disappeared into the crowd, 6 people who had just changed history, and behind them, the magical world was already beginning to crack and reshape itself around the reality of what had happened. The king was back on the board. And he was playing to win. Back in the ministry, in the now empty Wizengamot chamber, Dumbledore sat alone in the chief warlock's chair. The golden lines Harry's magic had drawn still pulsed faintly in the floor, and the dragon crown constellation still burned in the enchanted ceiling overhead. He sat there for a long time, perfectly still, looking at the cracks in the stone. Then he stood, removed his chief warlock's badge, and set it on the arm of the chair. He walked to the door, paused, and looked back at the chamber one last time. "I deserve that," he said quietly, to no one. The doors closed behind him with a sound like an ending. Chapter 3, Crown and Conquest. The attack came 3 days later, and it came exactly the way Daphne predicted it would. He'll hit Diagon Alley, she'd said the night before, standing at the map table in Potter Manor's war room, a room that hadn't existed until Harry needed it, the house reshaping itself around his intentions like a living thing. It's symbolic. It's public. It's where the magical world shops. If Voldemort can burn Diagon Alley, he proves that the new king can't protect his own people. It doesn't matter that you just claimed the crown 3 days ago. Perception is reality in wartime. How many Death Eaters? Sirius had asked, leaning over the table with the focused intensity of a man who remembered the First War all too well. "As many as he can muster. This won't be a raid. It'll be a statement." Daphne moved miniature figures across the map with her wand, red for enemy, gold for theirs. "He'll lead it himself. He has to. After what Harry did in the Wizengamot, anything less than a personal appearance looks like weakness." Harry had watched the figures move and felt the Pendragon magic stir in his blood, ancient battle instincts rising from somewhere deep in the inherited memory of kings who had fought and won and held their ground. "Then we'll be there first." So when the first explosion ripped through the morning air above Diagon Alley, a blast of green-black fire that took out the upper floor of Gamble and Japes and sent debris raining down on screaming shoppers, Harry was already standing on the roof of Gringotts, watching it happen. Not because he'd let it happen. Because the wards he'd spent 2 days weaving into the alley, crown wards, old magic, the kind of protection that the Ministry didn't know how to cast and Dumbledore had never bothered teaching, had absorbed the blast. Gamble and Jape's upper floor was gone, but the people below were untouched, wrapped in shimmering golden shields that had materialized the instant the curse hit. Harry watched the Death Eaters pour into the alley from 3 directions, Knockturn Alley to the south, the flow points at the Leaky Cauldron to the north, and straight down from Broomstick in the sky. 30 of them at least, masked and robed, spreading out in a formation that was almost military. Voldemort had been training them. 34, Daphne said from beside him. She had omnioculars pressed to her face and was counting with clinical precision. 2 squads from the south, 1 from the north, 8 flyers. And, she adjusted the focus. There. Coming through Knockturn. Voldemort himself, plus the inner circle. Bellatrix, Dolohov, Rookwood, both Lestrange brothers, Malfoy. 6 heavy hitters plus the Dark Lord. The evacuation. Neville's handling it. The passages are open. Harry looked down. Below, invisible to the Death Eaters but perfectly visible to him, Neville Longbottom was moving through the crowd like a shepherd, calm and purposeful, directing terrified shoppers toward the emergency portkey points that Harry had set up the day before. Behind the storefronts, members of the royalist families were appearing at prearranged positions, not to fight, but to manage the evacuation, to make sure that when the battle started, no civilians were in the crossfire. Hermione was at the Leaky Cauldron entrance with Cyrus Greengrass, locking down the northern approach. She couldn't match a Death Eater in a duel, not yet, though Harry suspected that day was coming sooner than anyone expected, but she designed a ward scheme that was about to make the northern squad very, very sorry they'd chosen that entry point. Sirius was somewhere in the shadows with Amelia Bones and a hand-picked team of Aurors. Bones had come around fast after the Wizengamot session, not out of loyalty to the crown, but out of sheer pragmatic fury at the Ministry's incompetence. When Harry had laid out the intelligence about Voldemort's likely attack and offered a joint operation, she'd agreed in under a minute. "He's coming up the main thoroughfare," Daphne said. She lowered the omnioculars. Her face was very still, very composed, but Harry had learned over 3 intense days to read the micro-expressions she tried so hard to hide. She was scared. She was also ready. "Harry. He's coming for you specifically. You know that. I'm counting on it." The plan was to engage the Death Eaters first and isolate him. Plans change. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch, not fear, not anger, but an absolute, unshakable certainty that radiated from him like heat from a star. "Daphne. I need you to trust me." She stared at him for 2 heartbeats. Then she nodded once, sharply. "Don't die. Wouldn't dream of it." He stepped off the roof of Gringotts. The fall should have killed him. Instead, magic caught him, not a spell, not a charm, but the raw ambient magic of Diagon Alley itself responding to the crown's authority. He descended like a figure from a medieval painting, robes billowing, ringed hands at his sides, and landed in the center of the main thoroughfare with a sound like a thunderclap that shattered every window within 50 yards. The Death Eaters froze. Every single one of them. The masked figures that had been advancing on terrified shoppers stopped mid-stride, because Harry Potter was standing in the middle of the alley wreathed in golden light, and the magic pouring off him was so dense it was visible, a shimmering corona that made the air warp and the cobblestones crack beneath his feet. "Tom." Harry's voice carried the length of the alley, amplified not by sonorous but by the Pendragon authority that treated magical Britain itself as an extension of the King's will. "I know you're here. I know you brought your best. Let's find out if it's enough." The crowd of Death Eaters parted, and Lord Voldemort walked through them like a blade through silk. He looked exactly as Harry remembered from the graveyard, tall, skeletal, those terrible red eyes burning in a face that had abandoned humanity so thoroughly it was almost abstract. But there was something different now. In the graveyard, Voldemort had been triumphant, gloating, savoring his resurrection like fine wine. Now, underneath the calculated menace, underneath the Dark Lord's carefully maintained aura of invincibility, Harry could see it. Fear. Not obvious. Not the kind of fear that showed on the surface. But it was there in the way Voldemort's eyes flicked to Harry's hands, counting the rings. In the way his grip on the U-wand was slightly too tight. In the half-second pause before he spoke, the pause of a man who had rehearsed his entrance and suddenly wasn't sure his lines were good enough. Harry Potter. Voldemort's voice was cold silk, carrying its own amplification. Playing at King's now? How very ambitious. Not playing. Harry didn't raise his wand. He didn't need to, he could feel all 7 houses pulsing in harmony, ready, waiting. You know what I am. You've always known. That's why you came to Godric's Hollow that night. Not just the prophecy, the bloodline. You wanted the Pendragon legacy for yourself. Something flickered in those red eyes. A crack in the mask. You thought you could claim it through conquest, Harry continued. Kill the last heir, absorb the bloodline through your Horcrux anchors. That was the plan, wasn't it? Become the king and the Dark Lord all at once. Except it didn't work. You killed my parents and the magic rejected you so hard it destroyed your body. You know nothing of what I planned, I know everything. The crown told me. Harry tapped his temple. 14 generations of Pendragon memories, Tom. Every king who ever wore this ring. They all remember their enemies, and you know what's funny? You're not the first Dark Lord who tried to steal the crown. You're not even the most impressive one. You're just the latest in a long line of failures who thought power was something you could take by force. Voldemort's composure shattered. The curse came without warning, a bolt of killing green that screamed through the air faster than thought. Harry didn't dodge. He raised his right hand and the Pendragon ring blazed, and the killing curse hit a shield of pure sovereign magic and detonated, not absorbed, not deflected, but broken apart into motes of green light that dissolved like sparks. The silence that followed was deafening. 34 Death Eaters stood witness to the impossible. The killing curse, the unstoppable, unblockable, ultimate expression of dark magic, had been stopped by a 15-year-old boy's open palm. Harry lowered his hand. My turn. He didn't use a wand. He didn't use a spell. He reached into the magic of the alley, the ley lines that ran beneath the cobblestones, the ward anchors, the centuries of accumulated magical resonance, and he pulled. The cobblestones beneath the Death Eater's feet turned to quicksand. Not slowly, instantly, one moment solid ground, the next a sucking, grasping trap that swallowed them to their waists before they could react. 12 Death Eaters, immobilized in a heartbeat, screaming and thrashing. The 8 flyers dove at him from above. Harry flicked his left hand skyward and the Gryffindor magic roared, a blast of force shaped like a lion's head, golden and enormous, that tore through the formation and sent broomsticks spinning in 8 different directions. 3 Death Eaters hit the ground unconscious. The other 5 managed to stay airborne, but they were scattered, disoriented, and Sirius's Auror team was already moving to intercept them. The northern squad hit Hermione's ward trap and the results were immediate and spectacular. The ward scheme she designed was elegant in its brutality, a cascading series of confundus fields, gravity inversions, and binding hexes that activated in sequence, each one triggered by the countercurse to the last. The more the Death Eaters fought it, the worse it got. Within 30 seconds, 8 masked figures were hanging upside down from lampposts, wandless and furious, while Hermione calmly collected their wands in a conjured bag. The southern approach was where the inner circle had entered, and that was where the real fight happened. Bellatrix Lestrange came at Harry like a force of nature, cackling, throwing curses with the manic abandon of a woman who'd been in Azkaban for 14 years and had never quite come back from it. Ickle Baby Potter wants to play king. Let's see if the king can bleed. The Cruciatus curse hit Harry's shield and rebounded. Bellatrix barely dodged her own curse, and the surprise on her face, the genuine, confused shock of someone whose favorite toy had suddenly stopped working, was almost comical. Neville sends his regards, Harry said, and hit her with a stunner so powerful it picked her up and threw her 30 feet into the wall of Ollivander's shop. She crumpled and didn't get up. Dolohov was smarter. He didn't charge, he flanked, circling around behind a collapsed market stall, firing cutting curses that sliced through the air with surgical precision. This was the wizard who'd nearly killed Hermione in the Department of Mysteries, and he fought like it, patient, lethal, exploiting angles. Harry respected the threat enough to draw his wand for this one, the holly and phoenix feather chorus singing with familiar warmth, and for 30 seconds they dueled properly, spell for spell, curse for counter, the air between them alive with light and destruction. Harry won. Not by overpowering Dolohov, though he could have, but by outthinking him. He let Dolohov commit to a pattern, let the Death Eater think he'd found a rhythm, then broke the pattern with a wandless spell from his offhand while his wand was still mid-cast. Dolohov's shield caught the wand spell. It didn't catch the wandless stunner that came from below, rising from the cobblestones themselves, and the Death Eater dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Rookwood lasted 8 seconds. The Lestrange brothers lasted 12, fighting back to back with the desperate coordination of men who knew they were outmatched. Lucius Malfoy took one look at the battlefield, saw which way it was going, and tried to disapparate. The Crown Wards held him in place, and Sirius appeared behind him with a grin that was all teeth. "Hello, Lucy," Sirius said. "Remember me?" Malfoy's wand hand was shaking. "Black. You're supposed to be a fugitive. A dead man. Wrong on both counts." Sirius disarmed him with a casual Expelliarmus that spoke of a dueling talent long dormant but not forgotten. "On your knees, Malfoy. The king wants a word with you later, and I'd hate for you to miss the appointment." Through it all, through the chaos and the screaming and the flashing spells and the crumbling masonry, Voldemort hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the alley, his Death Eaters falling around him like leaves from a dead tree, and his red eyes never left Harry. The battlefield cleared. The sounds of combat faded to groans and the clatter of oars securing prisoners. Harry stood 50 feet from Voldemort, and the alley between them was wrecked, craters in the cobblestones, shattered shopfronts, the air thick with dust and residual magic. But no bodies. No dead. Harry's wards had held. His people had held. "It's just us now, Tom. Do not call me that. It's your name. The one your mother gave you. The one you've been running from your entire life because you're so terrified of being ordinary." Harry walked forward. Each step sent ripples through the ambient magic, the ley lines pulsing beneath his feet. "That's what all this is about, isn't it? The Horcruxes, the followers, the war, it's all just a scared boy from an orphanage trying to prove he matters. You dare, I dare." Harry was 30 feet away now. 25. The 7 rings blazed on his fingers. "I've seen your memories, Tom. Through the scar, through the connection you made when you tried to murder a baby. I've seen the orphanage. I've seen the loneliness. I've seen the moment you decided that if the world wouldn't love you, you'd make it fear you instead." He stopped walking. 20 feet between them. "I grew up the same way. Cupboard under the stairs. Hand-me-down clothes. Told I was worthless every single day. The difference between us is that I didn't let it make me a monster." Voldemort's face was a mask of rage, but underneath it, underneath the fury and the contempt and the desperate, clawing need to be more than human, Harry saw something he hadn't expected to see. Pain. Old, calcified, buried so deep that Voldemort himself probably didn't know it was there anymore. The pain of Tom Riddle, the boy nobody wanted, the half-blood who'd remade himself into a myth because the reality was too unbearable. For one moment, Harry felt something dangerously close to pity. Then Voldemort attacked, and pity was a luxury he couldn't afford. This was nothing like the graveyard. In the graveyard, Voldemort had been toying with him, a cat with a mouse, enjoying the performance. This was Voldemort trying. Every ounce of dark magic he'd accumulated over 70 years, every forbidden curse, every weapon in his arsenal, unleashed in a storm of destruction that would have leveled a city block. Fiend fire roared from his wand, a serpent of cursed flame 50 feet high, screaming through the alley with a heat that melted stone. Harry countered with the Lo-Fei ring's magic, arcane, primordial, older than Hogwarts, and the fiend fire hit a wall of silver light and froze, the flames crystallizing into a sculpture of ice and dark glass that shattered harmlessly. Voldemort hurled a curse Harry had no name for, a bolt of absolute blackness that seemed to eat the light around it, a spell that felt like death given form. The Peverell ring answered, because the Peverells had always been intimate with death, and the bolt was absorbed into a shield of shadow that dispersed it into nothing. Curse after curse. Dark magic so vile that the cobblestones corroded where it passed, spells that whispered of madness, of torture, of 1,000 years of humanity's worst impulses refined into weapons. And Harry met every single one. Not just blocked them, answered them, each house's magic rising to counter its natural opposite. Gryffindor's courage against fear curses. Slytherin's cunning against mental attacks. Potter's steadfastness against raw destruction. The Black family's legendary viciousness against Voldemort's cruelty, darkness meeting darkness and cancelling out. Voldemort was breathing hard. Harry could see it, the heaving chest, the strain around those inhuman eyes, the first creeping realization that this was a fight he could not win. Not here. Not against the combined magical legacy of 7 houses channeled through a single focus. How? Voldemort hissed. You are a child. You are a half-blood, a nobody, raised by muggles, Harry agreed. Taught by goblins. Crowned by magic itself. He raised both hands, and all 7 rings blazed at once, gold and silver and ruby and emerald and shadow and starlight and something beyond color that hurt to look at. You spent 50 years trying to cheat death, Tom. I spent 15 years surviving it. Which do you think makes for better preparation? He brought his hands together and the 7 magics combined. It wasn't a spell. It wasn't a curse. It was something that had no name because it had never been done before, 7 ancient bloodlines, 7 magical legacies, focused through the Pendragon Crown's authority into a single expression of sovereignty. The magic that said, "This is my land. These are my people. And you are not welcome here." The blast hit Voldemort square in the chest. He flew backward. Not dramatically, not spectacularly, he simply went, launched off his feet like a ragdoll, and the magic followed him, stripping away his protections layer by layer. Harry felt them go, shield charms, defensive enchantments, dark rituals, the accumulated armor of decades. Gone. Peeled away like old paint, exposing the raw, diminished magic underneath. Voldemort hit the ground 80 feet away, cratered the cobblestones, and didn't get up immediately. When he did, it was slow, shaking, one hand braced on the ground. Blood, thin, dark, barely human, dripped from his nose and mouth. His one arm hung at a wrong angle. Harry walked toward him. Not running, not charging. Walking. The alley was silent around them, every auror, every prisoner, every spectator watching from behind barriers, all of them holding their breath. 20 feet away, Harry stopped. You can't kill me, Voldemort rasped. Something that might have been a smile twisted his lipless mouth. The Horcruxes. You don't even know where they all are. Kill this body and I'll just come back. Again and again and again. I am immortal, the diary, Harry said quietly. Destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets, 1993. Voldemort's smile faltered. The ring. Marvolo Gaunt's ring. Hidden in the Gaunt shack. Harry held up his hand, and the Peverell ring pulsed. The crown told me, Tom. 14 generations of kings, and every one of them understood soul magic. The ring Horcrux was made from the resurrection stone, a Peveril artifact. It called out to me the moment I claimed the house. I destroyed it this morning. The blood drained from Voldemort's already corpse-white face. The locket. Slytherin's locket, hidden in a cave on the coast. The cup, Hufflepuff's cup, in the Lestrange vault at Gringotts. Harry ticked them off on his fingers, each name landing like a hammer blow. Ragnarok was very helpful once I explained what was hidden in his bank. He considered it an insult, actually, dark magic contaminating goblin territory. The cup was destroyed an hour ago. The locket was recovered by Sirius and a house elf named Creature, long story, and destroyed last night. Voldemort tried to rise and couldn't. His magic was guttering, Harry could see it, the animating force that kept his reconstructed body moving was flickering like a candle in a gale. The diadem. Ravenclaw's diadem, hidden in the room of requirement at Hogwarts. Harry paused. I sent Dobby. Turns out house elves can go anywhere in Hogwarts, even rooms that are supposed to be hidden. He brought it back this morning. Destroyed. You couldn't have. The one in my scar was destroyed during the claiming ritual. The Lu Fei ring burned it out. That's 6. Harry crouched down so he was eye level with Voldemort. This close, he could see every crack in the Dark Lord's facade, the trembling, the terror, the dawning comprehension that immortality was a lie and always had been. Which just leaves you. The last piece. The 7th Horcrux, if you count the original soul fragment still rattling around in that body. Voldemort's red eyes were wide. For the first time, truly, completely, he looked like what he was, a frightened old man who'd broken his own soul so many times there was almost nothing left. You could have been something else, Harry said, and meant it. You had talent, intelligence, power. You could have been great, actually great, not the pathetic imitation of greatness you settled for. But you chose fear. Every single time, at every single crossroads, you chose fear. He stood up. I'm not going to kill you. The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. Behind him, Harry heard Sirius make a sharp, startled sound. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped. I'm not going to kill you, Harry repeated, because that's what you'd do. That's the move of a Dark Lord, not a king. And because, frankly, death is what you've been chasing your whole life, the one thing you're truly obsessed with. Dying would just prove you right. That death was the only thing worth fearing. He raised his hand. The Pendragon ring pulsed, and the Slytherin ring answered, and the Lu Fei ring wove between them, and what Harry did next was the kind of magic that would be debated by scholars for centuries. He reached into Voldemort's chest, not physically, magically, and he found the shattered remains of Tom Riddle's soul. What was left was barely there, a sliver, a fragment, a dim ember of what had once been a complete human being. And instead of snuffing it out, Harry bound it. The magic was part Pendragon, the sovereign's authority over all magical beings within his realm. Part Slytherin, the right of the head of house over the family's descendants. Part Lu Fei, the ancient, arcane power that had always danced on the edge of what was possible. Chains of light erupted from the cobblestones and wrapped around Voldemort's body. Not physical chains, magical ones, sinking into his flesh, his bones, his magic, binding every ounce of power he possessed. His wand cracked and fell from nerveless fingers. His red eyes flickered, dimmed, and turned, slowly, horribly, back to the dark brown they'd been when Tom Riddle was a boy. What? Voldemort's voice cracked. It was higher now, younger, stripped of the magically deepened resonance. What have you done to me? Bound your magic. Permanently. Every drop, every spark, every trace. You're a squib now, Tom. For the rest of your natural life. Harry stepped back. You'll stand trial. A real trial, in front of the Wizengamot, with evidence and witnesses and a verdict. Not because you deserve fairness, you don't, but because the people you terrorize deserve to see justice done properly. Voldemort, Tom Riddle, stared up at him with those newly brown eyes, and the expression on his face was something Harry would remember for the rest of his life. Not rage. Not defiance. Bewilderment. The utter, total incomprehension of a man who had spent his entire existence accumulating power and had just had it all taken away by someone who considered power a responsibility rather than a prize. "It's over, Tom." Harry turned his back on him. It was deliberate, a message, a statement. "You are not a threat anymore. You are not worth watching. Madam Bones. He's yours." Amelia Bones stepped forward out of the Auror line, and her face was set in an expression of grim, professional satisfaction. "Aurors. Secure the prisoner. Anti-magic restraints, maximum containment." She glanced at Harry. "Your Grace. Well done. Don't thank me yet. We've still got a war to clean up." The Aurors moved in. Voldemort, Tom, didn't resist. He seemed barely aware of what was happening, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The chains of light pulsed gently, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as the most feared Dark Lord in history was lifted, bound, and carried away by 4 Aurors like a common criminal. Harry stood in the wreckage of Diagon Alley and let out a long, slow breath. Around him, the damage was significant but not catastrophic. Shopfronts shattered, cobblestones cratered, Ollivanders would need a new wall, and the upper floor of Gamble and Japes was simply gone. But no one was dead. Not a single civilian casualty, thanks to Neville's evacuation, Hermione's wards, and the Royalist family's coordination. Even the Death Eaters had been taken alive, which was more than most of them deserved. Neville reached him first, breathing hard, soot-streaked, grinning like a maniac. "You absolute madman. You bound his magic. I didn't even know that was possible. It wasn't, until about 5 minutes ago." Harry flexed his hands. The rings were quiet now, their magic settling back into the low hum of readiness. The crown magic, it's not like spells. It doesn't care about what's supposed to be possible. It just cares about what's right. Remind me never to get on your bad side. Sirius appeared, pulling Harry into a rough, one-armed hug. His other arm was in a conjured sling. He'd taken a cutting curse during the fight with Malfoy that had gone deeper than it looked. "Your mum would be having kittens right now. Proud kittens, but kittens. Dad? Your dad would be doing a victory lap on a broomstick. Possibly while singing." Hermione came running up the alley from the north, bag of confiscated wands still over her shoulder, hair enormous and wild and crackling with residual magic. She launched herself at Harry and squeezed so hard he heard his ribs creak. "Don't you ever jump off a building in front of me again," she said into his shoulder. "No promises." "I'm serious, Harry. I know. Thank you." The northern wards were brilliant. They were, weren't they? She pulled back, and despite the tears on her cheeks, her expression was already shifting toward analytical. "The cascading Confundus sequence worked even better than I projected. I think if I adjusted the trigger threshold, Hermione." "Right. Later." Daphne descended from the Gringotts roof by a far more dignified method than Harry's, a levitation charm, controlled and precise, touching down on the cobblestones without so much as a scuff on her boots. She walked to where Harry stood, surveyed the wreckage, surveyed Harry, and said, "You deviated from the plan." "Yes. The plan was to engage the Death Eaters first, weaken the outer ring, and then confront Voldemort with full backup. I know what the plan was. I wrote half of it. And instead you jumped off a building and soloed the Dark Lord. The plan changed when I saw the fiend fire. If I'd waited, people would have died." Daphne stared at him for a long, measured moment. Then something extraordinary happened. The Ice Queen of Slytherin cracked a genuine, unguarded smile. It transformed her face, not softening it, exactly, but illuminating it, like sunlight hitting a glacier and finding diamond underneath. "You're impossible," she said. You're welcome. I didn't say thank you. Not with words. She held his gaze for a beat too long, then looked away, composure snapping back into place like a visor. The press will be here in minutes. You need a statement. Something short, something powerful, something that doesn't make you sound like a conquering tyrant. How about Voldemort attacked, we stopped him, nobody died, the crown works. Needs polish. I'll handle it. She pulled out her folio, already writing. Around them, the alley was coming back to life. People were emerging from the evacuation points, staring at the damage, staring at the bound Death Eaters being processed by Aurors, staring at Harry. An old witch with a shopping bag pressed against her chest walked up to him, reached out with trembling fingers, and touched his arm as if confirming he was real. You saved us, she whispered. That's the job, Harry said. He didn't know where the words came from. They just felt right. She burst into tears and hugged him, and suddenly there were more people, crowding around, reaching, calling his name, some crying, some laughing, a tide of gratitude and relief and something Harry hadn't expected, hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of people who'd been lied to by politicians and failed by institutions. Real hope. The kind that comes from seeing someone stand between you and destruction and refuse to move. Neville and Sirius flanked him instinctively, creating space without pushing people away. Harry shook hands, spoke to people, let them see him, let them see that the king was real, was here, was 15 years old and slightly singed and utterly unbroken. He was in the middle of this when he felt the familiar presence behind him. Not hostile. Not threatening. Just, there. Patient and heavy with the weight of a century of mistakes. Professor, Harry said without turning. Your Grace. Dumbledore's voice was quiet. Stripped of its usual warmth and grandfatherly charm, it sounded old. Simply, honestly old. May I have a moment? Harry turned. The crowd parted, they'd been parting for Dumbledore for decades, out of respect, out of awe. But now Harry noticed something different in the way people looked at the old man. Not hostility, not yet. But a new distance. A reassessment. The Gringotts records had been published in the Prophet that morning, Daphne had made sure of it, and the whole country now knew that Albus Dumbledore had suppressed a child's inheritance, stolen from his vaults, and voted his seats without authorization. Some things couldn't be unlearned. Walk with me, Harry said. They walked together through the damaged alley, past the Aurors and the rubble and the slowly dispersing crowd. Dumbledore's robes were subdued by his standards, deep blue, no sparkle, no moons or stars. He looked like a man attending a funeral. His own, perhaps. I watched the battle from the roof of Flourish and Blots, Dumbledore said after a long silence. I was prepared to intervene if necessary. It wasn't necessary. No. It wasn't. A pause. The magic you used against Voldemort, the binding. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't believe it was possible. It wasn't, by any framework you would have taught me. The crown magic operates on different rules. Older rules. Yes. I'm beginning to understand that. Another pause, longer this time. Harry. I owe you an apology that no words are adequate to express. I owe you an explanation, though I suspect you no longer need one. And I owe you a debt that I cannot repay in the time I have left. Harry stopped walking. They were standing in front of the ruin of Fortescue's ice cream shop. Florian Fortescue had disappeared weeks ago, taken by Death Eaters, Harry suspected. One more thing to investigate. One more wrong to right. You said something in Gringotts, Harry said. You said you loved me like a grandson. Did you mean it? Dumbledore's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Without the twinkle, without the performance, they were just blue. Old and blue and full of grief. I did. I do. Then explain something to me. Explain how you love someone and still plan for them to die. The old man was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Because I believed the mathematics of it. One life against millions. I told myself the numbers justified the plan. I told myself that your sacrifice would mean something, that it would be noble, purposeful, necessary. I convinced myself so thoroughly that I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a variable. He swallowed. Gellert warned me about that. Decades ago, in his cell in Nurmengard. He said, Albus, you will find another brilliant young person to use as a weapon, and you will convince yourself it is for the greater good, and you will be wrong. I told him he was projecting. He laughed at me. Grindelwald was right about you. Grindelwald knew me better than anyone alive. That should tell you everything about the quality of my character. Harry looked at him, really looked, past the legend and the reputation and the century of accumulated power. And what he saw was a man who had spent his entire life terrified of his own capacity for manipulation, and who had responded to that fear not by stopping, but by convincing himself that his manipulations were benevolent. I need you to hear something, Harry said. I'm not going to destroy you. I could. The documentation alone would see you in Azkaban. But you're 150 years old, you've done genuine good for this world, and frankly, I need your knowledge more than I need your head on a pike. Something that might have been hope flickered across Dumbledore's face. But, Harry said, and the word landed like a gavel, you will resign as Chief Warlock. Effective immediately. You will resign as headmaster of Hogwarts. The school needs someone who sees students as people, not resources. You will provide me with every piece of information you have about Voldemort, his operations, his followers, his plans. Everything. No more hoarding knowledge. No more deciding what I'm ready for. And in return, you get to keep your freedom and your dignity. You get to advise me, honestly, openly, without games, for as long as you're willing and able. Your experience is valuable. Your intentions, when they're not poisoned by your savior complex, are good. I don't want you as an enemy, Albus. I want you as what you should have been all along, a wise old man who helps, instead of a wise old man who controls. Dumbledore stared at him. The tears that had been threatening finally fell, tracking down his lined cheeks into his beard, and he made no move to wipe them away. You are a far better man than I ever was, Dumbledore said. At any age. I had worse role models. Made me figure things out for myself. Harry held out his hand. Do we have a deal? Dumbledore took his hand. His grip was firm but trembling. We have a deal, Your Grace. Harry. Harry. A ghost of the old twinkle appeared in those blue eyes, then faded. There is one thing I should tell you immediately. The Order of the Phoenix, the group I mentioned, the one funded by your money. He had the grace to look ashamed. They're good people. Fighters, strategists, intelligence gatherers. They've been working against Voldemort in the shadows since his return. They'll want to meet you. Set it up. Potter Manor, this evening. Harry released his hand. And Albus? The 2 million galleons. I'll expect a full accounting and a repayment plan. Of course. Good. Now go home. You look like you need rest. Dumbledore nodded. He turned, took 2 steps, then paused and looked back. The Horcruxes. You found them all in 3 days. I spent years searching. You were looking alone. I had a kingdom helping me. Dumbledore's lips twitched. Quite. He disapparated with a soft pop, and Harry was alone in front of the ruined ice cream shop. He stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then he pulled out the parchment list Daphne had given him that morning, already half completed, already being updated in real time by charmed ink as events unfolded. The entry at the top, Defeat Voldemort, had a neat checkmark beside it. Below it, the list continued, Establish formal court. Reform Wizengamot. Address werewolf legislation. Negotiate new goblin accords. Rebuild Diagon Alley. Investigate disappearances. Reform Hogwarts curriculum. Establish magical orphanage. Address Muggleborn integration. It went on. And on. And on. Harry folded the list and put it away. He'd get to all of it. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. For the first time in his life, he had the power to actually fix things instead of just surviving them. But first, he had somewhere to be. Potter Manor was golden in the late afternoon light when Harry landed on the front lawn. The wards sang their welcome, and Mipsy appeared with a crack, already fussing about dinner and whether Master Harry had eaten and didn't he know he was still a growing boy, crown or no crown. The others were already there. Neville in the study, writing letters to royalist families with updates on the battle. Hermione in the library, surrounded by law books, already drafting reform proposals. Sirius on the back terrace, nursing his injured arm with a fire whiskey and a grin, talking to Remus Lupin, who had apparently arrived while Harry was at the alley and was looking at his best friend's godson like he was seeing a ghost. Cyrus Greengrass was in the formal sitting room, calling royalist families, coordinating, organizing. The man had been born for this, the spider at the center of a web, pulling threads that had been waiting 600 years to be pulled. Harry found Daphne on the balcony of the master suite. He didn't know how she'd gotten up there, and he suspected she'd simply decided the stairs would get out of her way, and they had. She was watching the sunset over the Welsh hills, her folio closed for once, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe arrangement. She looked younger like this. More human. Less like a weapon and more like a girl who was 17 and had just helped win a war. "Hey," Harry said, joining her at the railing. "Hey." Statement go out. Profits running it as a special edition. Headline, King defeats Dark Lord in Diagon Alley, no casualties. Rita Skeeter is having the journalistic experience of a lifetime. I almost feel sorry for her, Quill. Harry laughed. It felt good, the kind of laughter that came from genuine relief rather than hysteria. Thank you. For all of this. The planning, the strategy, the list. You've been 3 steps ahead of everyone since the moment you walked into this house. Daphne was quiet for a moment. My father raised me for this. Not this specifically, he didn't know who the king would be. But he raised me to be ready. To know the laws, the politics, the leverage points. To be useful when the crown returned. She paused. I used to resent it. Being trained for something that might never happen. Being the Ice Queen, keeping everyone at arm's length because attachment was a vulnerability and greengrasses couldn't afford vulnerabilities. Not while we were waiting. And now. She looked at him. In the sunset light, her gray eyes caught gold, and the glacier cracked wider than Harry had ever seen it. Now I'm glad. Because you needed someone, and I was ready. That means something. It means everything. The moment stretched between them, warm and fragile and full of potential. Harry was acutely aware that he was 15, that she was 17, that they'd known each other, really known each other, for exactly 3 days, and that none of that mattered as much as the fact that she'd stood on a rooftop during a battle and trusted him to win. We have a long road ahead, Daphne said softly. The Death Eaters are captured, but the ideology isn't. The ministry needs to be rebuilt from scratch. Hogwarts needs reform. The werewolf laws are barbaric. The Goblin Accords haven't been updated in centuries. And there are people who will fight the crown, not because they're evil, but because they're afraid of change. I know. It's going to take years. I know that too. You're 15. Keeps coming up, yeah. She almost smiled. I'm not kneeling. Didn't ask you to. I asked you to stand beside me. There's a difference. The almost smile became a real one. Small, private, the kind of smile that Daphne Greengrass probably hadn't given anyone in years. Then I'll stand. They watched the sun go down over the valley, and the wards hummed around them, and somewhere inside the manor, Sirius was laughing at something Remus had said, and Hermione and Neville were arguing about legislative procedure, and the house elves were preparing dinner for more people than the house had held in 14 years. It wasn't a fairy tale. Fairy tales ended with the coronation and the happily ever after. This was what came after: the work, the rebuilding, the slow and difficult process of turning a broken world into something better. Harry wasn't naive enough to think his crown solved everything. Power was a tool, not a solution. The real work would be done by people: Neville's loyalty, Hermione's brilliance, Sirius's courage, Daphne's strategy, Cyrus's connections, and a network of families who'd kept faith for 6 centuries. But for right now, in this moment, with the sunset painting the Welsh hills gold and the smell of Mipsy's cooking drifting up from below, Harry felt something he'd never felt before. Not happiness, exactly, something deeper. Something with roots. He felt like he was home. Not just in the manor, not just in the sense of having a house with his name on it. Home in his own skin, in his own power, in the knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The Pendragon ring pulsed warmly on his finger, and through it, he felt the kingdom, every ley line, every ward boundary, every magical heartbeat in Britain. His people. His responsibility. His purpose. Mipsy's voice drifted up from somewhere below. Dinner is being ready, and if Master Harry is not coming down in 2 minutes, Mipsy is coming up there and Master Harry will not be liking it. Daphne raised an eyebrow. Your house elf is terrifying. She's magnificent, Harry corrected. He pushed off the railing. Come on. If we're late, she'll make us eat in the kitchen, and last time that happened, Sirius was relegated to a footstool. They went downstairs together, and the manor settled around them like a contented cat, warm and alive and full of people who mattered. The dining room was chaotic, Sirius telling war stories, Remus correcting them, Neville arguing with Hermione about the precedent for crown veto power, Cyrus quietly eating soup and looking more at peace than he had in decades. Harry sat at the head of the table, his family's table, and Daphne sat to his right, and for one evening, they were just people sharing a meal in a house that had waited a long time to be full again. After dinner, Harry stepped outside alone. The night was clear, the stars bright, and the valley lay silver and silent under the moon. He walked to the edge of the property, where the wards met the wild Welsh hills, and stood there in the dark. He thought about Cedric. About his parents. About every person who'd been hurt because the people with power hadn't used it well enough, hadn't been brave enough, hadn't cared enough. He thought about Tom Riddle in a ministry holding cell, stripped of magic, facing the rest of his life as the thing he feared most, ordinary. He thought about Dumbledore, going home to an empty office, surrendering the titles he'd held for decades. He thought about Fudge, scrambling to save his career. He thought about the families who'd waited 6 centuries for this night. He thought about tomorrow. There would be trials. Reforms. Arguments. Resistance. The Daily Prophet would swing between adoration and suspicion depending on the news cycle. Politicians would try to co-opt him. Purebloods would try to control him. Dark wizards who'd escaped today's battle would regroup and plot. The work of building a just kingdom was never finished, it was a process, not a destination, and Harry was 15 and mortal and making it up as he went. But he wasn't alone. That was the thing. For the first time in his life, truly, completely, he was not alone. A light flicked on in the manor behind him, Hermione's window, in the library wing. She'd be up all night, researching, preparing, building the intellectual framework for the world they were going to create. Next to it, another light, Neville, writing letters, reaching out, turning connections into alliances. Below, the warm glow of the sitting room where Sirius and Remus were probably talking until dawn, rebuilding a friendship that Azkaban had interrupted but not destroyed. And on the balcony, a single figure with pale hair, watching him. Harry raised a hand. Daphne raised one back. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. The moment was enough. He turned back to the stars, to the valley, to the kingdom spread out invisible and vast beyond the hills. Right, Harry said quietly, to the night, to the magic, to the memory of everyone who'd come before. So what's next? The wards hummed. The stars turned. And somewhere deep in the ancient magic of Britain, something that had been sleeping for 600 years opened its eyes, stretched, and smiled. The king was home. The work was just beginning. And Harry Potter, for the first time in his life, couldn't wait to find out what happened next.